Welcome to Raging Bullets, a DC Comics fan podcast, episode 320. Welcome to Raging Bullets. I'm Sean Whalen, drnorge, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Jim, the sensei of the whatnot, Segulant, and the Duke of You-Know. On this episode, our first segment is focused heavily on Before Watchmen Ozymandias, issues 1 and 2. We dissect that. And then we start taking a look through a listener voicemail. We had this casual discussion about just some of our thoughts on the New 52 1 year later, and it led to a great discussion on the state of Superman and right up to the annual that was just released. And it's very casual, taking a look at some of our favorites. We kind of break down top 5, top 10 lists of where our heads are kind of at. And then we also take a look at what if we had to pick a single issue, and this was from Twitter. If we had to pick a single issue that was one of our favorites from the year, what would that be? And that's a very hard thing to break down, so we end up doing that off of that discussion as well. We are proud members of the Comics Podcast Network and the League of Comic Book Podcasts. Sponsoring us this episode is DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. Over at DCBService.com for September, they just released what they're going to be doing, and once again, they're offering 50% off all new DC trades and hardcovers. This is great if you are somebody that really likes collected editions. That 50% off will really shave down the price point of a lot of these wonderful collected editions. So head on over to DCBService.com and take a look at what kind of deals you can get on pre-ordering. I want to remind everyone, too, that they're a Comixology digital partner. And what that means is if you're buying your books digitally, like I like a lot of these direct-to-digital releases that DC's doing. I also have some stuff outside of DC that I've been getting direct-to-digital just because there's some books that I'm really enjoying that I wanted to try out, and I started buying them digitally, and I just kept buying them digitally, collect them that way. The great thing about going through DCB Services, first of all, you're supporting our show sponsor. You also earn off of every purchase 5% credit towards anything you want to shop with. It doesn't cost you anything more to do that, but through using our sponsor, you build yourself a credit base that you can use to buy anything over at DCBService.com. So consider making yourself an account if you don't already have one, and make sure to do all your digital purchases through DCBService.com. Build up that credit. It's a win-win deal. Over at InStockTrades.com, they are doing another one of these. They've been doing these end-of-the-world sales, and this month it's DC. What it is all DC trades and hardcovers at InStockTrades.com are 45% off, so anything in their back catalog. They also still have a massive selection of them at 65% off. So if you've been looking for any collected editions, this is the time to do it. They've got the Invisibles Omnibus hardcover, for example. This book regularly retails for $150. It's 45% off, $82.50. So this is a great opportunity to get some of these collected editions. You have to be looking for some of the larger or smaller volumes, get 4 or 5 of them, get that shipping at 50% off and save yourself some money. I'm somebody that I love to have collected editions around. When I'm done reading my monthly books, I jump to a collected editions. I like to read a lot of titles that I haven't read before in collected edition format, not just from DC, but from all publishers. But for those of us that are DC fans here, this is a great month right now to stop by InStockTrades.com and check out the amazing deals. Save some money on the collected editions. You're going to, at the least, you're going to get 45% off any collected edition at InStockTrades.com from DC. So consider stopping over there and doing that. I want to thank DCB Service and InStockTrades.com for continuing to support our show. Oh, Jim, what kind of a podcast are we?
Raging Bullets is a spoiler podcast. We go in-depth in the plotline, story twists, and whatnot of the comics we're discussing on the show. So, if you haven't read the books, you may want to come back later so you can better enjoy the show.
Lasers! He's got lasers!
Jim, we're going to continue our look at Before Watchmen with Ozymandias, and we're going to talk about issues 1 and 2. Len Wein is the writer, Jay Lee on art, John Workman letters, June Chung colorist, Phil Jimenez with Romulo Farado Jr., and I apologize, I know I butchered that as it's Fajardo Jr., Jim Lee with Scott Williams and Alex Sinclair on variant covers, Camelia Zhang, assistant editor, Mark Doyle, associate editor, Will Dennis, editor, Watchmen created by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons, and apologies for any name butchery. One word comes to mind when I think of this book: gorgeous. It's just a beautiful, beautiful book. Jay Lee's doing the artwork on a lot of the Dark Tower series from Marvel, And I'm a huge fan of Stephen King. So this is the kind of artwork that I'm getting from there. And it's really, really great to see him on something like this, because I think this was a good choice for an artist. The storyline's been great. This is a character who's a conqueror. And we really get into his head what his childhood background was, what led him on the path that we see, what led him to feel like he had this destiny to set the world on the quote-unquote right path, as we saw in the original Watchmen 12-issue miniseries. I really enjoyed these first 2 issues immensely, because we get into the mind of somebody who is the villain of the piece, but yet there's points in time where you have sympathy for him, or you can see where, not saying that I agree with him, but you can see where he's coming from, and what led him to the conclusions that he has. I'm not saying you have to agree with him, but I think the best villains in a story are the ones where you can understand how they got from A to B. And this miniseries does a really great job of, I think, starting to paint a picture of what in his life led him to be who he is. I don't know if you agree with me. I just really enjoyed the first 2 issues of this because of that.
You kind of do get a little sympathy for the devil. And I think that is definitely something I got from the title. And it's funny because you talk about just how gorgeous the artwork is. When they first started announcing the creative teams, I had heard, when they said Jay Lee, I heard Jim Lee. So I was thinking Jim Lee is doing the internal art for this. I was like, wow. And then when the book came out, it's right there on the cover. It doesn't say Jim, it says Jay, but in my mind, I saw Jim Lee. So I opened the book and I'm reading it going, wow, he really changed his art style just for this book. I'm like, man, this is awesome. I'm sitting there thinking, he's the man. This is some incredible artwork here. I'm like, wow. And then when I went through my second read-through, which is my art read-through, that's when I actually looked at the creative team, and that's when I finally saw it was a different name. And I was like, okay, that's why it's a completely different art style.
Is this your first Jay Lee book?
Yes. It's the first time I've ever read anything by him. So I was just like, whoa, this is something impressive. And it was then when I realized that it was somebody completely different that I really started delving into just sitting there and I've actually, it's funny, I've done multiple art read-throughs on this book. Normally, my normal reading path is I read it through, I go back through the second time, I do the art read-through where I'm not reading the words, I'm just looking at the pictures, just taking in everything, and then I'll usually go back through again and I'll do another normal read where I'm reading the words and looking at the art. With this one, I've done multiple just art read-throughs, just flipping and looking at the pages and just seeing the story that's being crafted by the artwork and looking at the details, looking, at the, just, and this is, I'm talking a full color, a full creative team just nods and just, oh my God, this is beautiful work. Coloring, just lettering, everything that's coming together in this, visually has been just a very pleasing, just amazing going, wow, this is some cool stuff here. This is something that, the name now is obviously locked in my brain. And this is a creator that when I see his, I'm assuming it's a he, I'm not sure if it's a male, female. But,
Jay Lee?
What?
Jay Lee?
Yeah.
Male.
Okay, just yeah.
I'm a huge Jay Lee fan. So okay. Jay Lee's been one of those for years and years and years, not just at DC, throughout comics. Jay Lee's been one of those that he very quickly became an artist that I tend to follow to projects, including create her own projects of his own. And I just, as a matter of fact, I got one of his that was just recently collected over the last couple. I shouldn't say recently; it was over the last couple of years. It was collected in a really cool hardcover. And I don't know, just it's one of those artists. The Dark Tower series in particular lately has been where I've been mainly seeing his work, and it's been just this kind of stunning artwork. I mean, it's just, whoa. Majestic. Majestic is probably, and this is a character who needs a majestic art style for a lot of what's being presented with him and his viewpoint.
Yeah, and again, this is also just, you got to throw the nods to the colorist.
Oh, yeah.
Again, another colorist, I don't know if I've ever read any of their work. So this is, again, a wonderful creative team that just gelling together. And you talk about majestic. That's definitely majestic. There's got to be a kind of a regal feel to it. Just this kind of moments where they're...
What was that? Wait, what was that again? I didn't catch that.
Moments, Yeah, and you have to have that with this character, with who he is, what he's about, and especially when this is taking place. This is taking place right before the end of Watchmen, right as he's getting ready to execute, his crime slash, last-ditch effort to save mankind, however you want to see the character, however you want to see him as hero or villain or something in between. This is that moment, and this is his recording for posterity. And part of it is a final journal and a final declaration of who he is. And it was a really cool point in the Watchmen universe to tell the story, to tell his backstory, to see where he comes from, and kind of an understanding and appreciation of him. He's a character that I never really saw just how powerful he was. I got to see him as the puppet master and the manipulator, and you see him lay out this beautiful scheme and plan, but just the reverence and the fact that he was able to pull it off before always was something that was like, oh, okay, yeah, he's quote unquote the self-proclaimed smartest man. Okay, well, now we're seeing, yeah, he kind of is. We're seeing that he is that good mentally and physically, and we're seeing where he came from, how he came about. And it's, again, like with our Night Owl discussion, this series really helped me appreciate him and really helped me get a stronger connection. And I'm like, oh, all right, I can see why this guy, one, did what he did, but I can also see how he was able to pull it off. And it adds to the Watchmen story. And again, another miniseries that's making me more excited to go back and read Watchmen, to go back and pull it out and see, especially once this is done. I'm actually very eagerly anticipating my Watchmen read now.
Looking at his childhood, he was groomed from birth to be a leader. His father was a businessman who was trying to bring his businesses over to the United States. But one of his goals with moving here, the second his wife was pregnant, he moved here immediately so his son would be born in the U.S., so he could, as he rationalized it, eventually be president. So his thinking was that could never happen if he's not born here. So, that was, and even Alexander of Macedonia being one of his father's childhood heroes, going back to his name. These were really, really cool elements that show that this wasn't something that he just invented himself. They were little seeds that were planted right from his birth. Then you take the fact that this kid at his childhood, by 4, he's self-taught to read and has read all 24 volumes of the encyclopedia. I'm an adult, and I could not sit down and read all 24 volumes of the encyclopedia. I would fall asleep. But if you look at this kid, and this is where the art style works, you're seeing this kid absorbing and engaging in that information. And encyclopedias are very dry. They're meant to be reference books. They're not meant to be read cover to cover. But this kid was so into knowledge as a concept that he just dove into that. It really just sets aside this thing that when he starts something, he sets out to conquer it. And he's done that since childhood. And to the point where at school, he did it with every one of his studies. He's acing tests. And the other kids, you can even see in that initial sequence where he's proudly holding up his test, the kids are looking at him, and there's one, looking confused. The other one's looking at him with, anger and resentment and what I guess would be jealousy. But the school was so convinced that he couldn't possibly have done that, this kid had to have cheated. I mean, you can't be that smart, right? Which really shows the importance of saying, hey, make sure you get your facts before you start accusing a kid of cheating. If the kid, there is a possibility the kid could really be that smart and that learned. Make sure you check into his childhood background. But the dad told him, you got to stay under the radar now. Now, this sets this poor kid on a social path where he's an oddball, quirky. Obviously, being the brain would have already put him there, but now he has to be like a social misfit because he doesn't want to slip up. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't talk to people, doesn't make the friends. He probably has conversations, but they're very limited. He's very withdrawn, very distant because he doesn't want to make a mistake. What's that going to do to this kid? And you're watching other kids play, I don't know, I guess maybe with jealousy, but it's also separating him from the world. He doesn't know people as friends. He doesn't know people as associates. At this age, it's one of the reasons why it's critical for children to make friendships. It's so you're not disconnected from the world. One of the themes from Watchmen that I really love, and I think this bleeds over into multiple characters, it shows the dangers of becoming disconnected from the world. When we talked about Dr. Manhattan, I think we're going to see very similar themes with Dr. Manhattan of a guy who became disconnected from the world, and how important it is for us to engage in conversation, to have debates, to, broaden our horizons a bit. You and I do that every week when we talk about comics. You see comics in a way that I don't. And I love when you'll throw out these things that I think are so bizarre and out there, and they wind up being right, because it just shows that a different perspective a lot of times on the same topic, a fresh pair of eyes will sometimes see things a little differently, no matter how many years you've been involved in something. And I think this story is a great example of a guy who gradually becomes more and more disconnected from the world. It's not always so good to look at the world objectively. You need to live in it. You need to be a part of it. You need to be fully engaged in it. Otherwise, you're going to be disconnected from all the quirks. The world isn't a perfect place, nor do we want it to be. I think it'd be a very boring place if it became the world that Veidt wanted to craft, ultimately, would be a very boring place, a very creepy place, because it would be too perfect.
Yeah, well, yes and no. I think it's weird because it's part of the reason I kind of like the character, because I understand where he's coming from. Being often, my genius is often misunderstood as well. So it's, he and I have that similarities and that commonality between us that, great minds are often, looked at and scoffed at. But, there is a understanding to what he wants to do and why he wants to do it. And the one thing that was funny, because you talk about that scene where he's sitting there proudly holding up his paper. If you look at the cronies on either side of him, that's Jerry and his buddies who later on in the issue beat him up, who steal his lunch. So that was something I really like, the fact that you see this initial, again, an really cool art moment where you see these guys initially, then you later see them taking out their aggression, taking out their anger at him. So his attempt to fly under the radar really doesn't work for him. And it's, part of, again, what he has to deal with and where he has to come from. And he has to step up and make the change, because the teacher isn't going to do anything. His parents can't really do anything. They could go down there and talk to the principal, but we've already seen that the principal is clueless as to what needs to be done. So there's a lot of just, the inequities and just the injustices that he's being exposed to as a child. He doesn't have the Bruce Wayne, I witnessed my parents die, but he does have that as a child. He is seeing the underbelly of man. He is seeing the darkness. He is seeing just this negative side of humanity. So that is the initial formations of why he does what he does. And it's, again, I'm not justifying his murdering millions of people to try to create a life, and maybe his perfect world would be relatively boring. But there is a understanding, and it's why I said in the beginning, you get the sympathy for the devil. You kind of understand why he's doing this more than, it's not just about, look at me, I'm the smartest man, this is what I can do. This is about him, this little kid who's getting picked on, this little kid who's had to hold back, can't express himself, who doesn't want that to happen. He wants everyone to, fulfill their potential. And
I'm going to tell you what I think the pivotal mistake is here. In this moment where the principal's telling the parents that the test scores were so high and it's impossible and that this kid somehow cheated, the parents should have pushed for him to have a retake or, some other testing measure to prove his intelligence, instead of making this kid hide from who he is. Because the second they set him on this path and didn't support who he is, I think they only further emphasized his disconnect from the world, put him in a position where he became quirkier and quirkier to these other kids. I do think because of his braininess, he probably would have still been bullied. So that I don't think that situation I'm mentioning, but I think if the parents had been more supportive of him embracing who he is, at least at the end of the day, I think he would have still gone to the dojo. I still think he would have wound up being this martial artist. But I think that's psychological of hiding yourself, denying yourself. I don't think he would have donned the mask. I think what might have happened instead is he would have learned to be publicly more comfortable with himself and maybe become, I don't know, a little bit more attached to the world, had friends, had something that he didn't seem to have growing up. Those influences were just not there. I don't think that the parents, their decision would have changed what happened in the bullying sequence, because I think those kids saw a target, and I think he looked like a nerdy target. And I think he still would have had to go and join the dojo and all that stuff. But I think maybe if they'd been more supportive, maybe that kid's leg wouldn't have been shattered. I think that maybe the parents would have been a little bit more involved. The school would have been more involved. He would have learned maybe a little bit of a better path than he did. I still think he would have gone to the dojo, though. I still think this was a kid who logically was looking at him being bullied. I need to deal with this in my own way. I need to do that. I think this is a kid who just was a little bit ahead of his time. I think too ahead of his time there. Went to the dojo on his own. That never should have happened. That should have been something the parents should have been involved in. But the parents made it clear that, early on, we deal with our problems by hiding certain things from the public. And I think that's why he started hiding some of his decisions from his parents. I must deal with this in my own way, in my own time. Because they kind of left him in the cold when it came to the situation with the testing. If they had supported him, maybe he would have talked to them, I guess what I'm getting at, about his plans. And maybe they could have helped guide him to a better way to defend himself instead of being offensive about it, if that makes sense.
Oh, definitely.
I think there's pivotal events that could have been slightly different in his life had his support piece been a little different. And I love that this series made me really think about, wow, the parents mishandled that situation. The whole dojo thing with him being alone led to a situation where it was a lot more brutal than maybe it would have been. I still think he would have gone to the dojo. I don't think anything was going to change that because of his intelligence. I think, he already had in his mind that, hey, if people are attacking you, you need to learn how to defend yourself. And that was something he would have come to. But imagine how that might have turned out differently had he had somebody to talk to about it. Somebody to use. He doesn't have a confidant. Nowhere in this book, in the first 2 issues, do we see anybody. He builds relationships, even as a girlfriend. But nobody is a confidant to his internal struggles, his internal dialogue. Anytime you have an idea where you're the only person making it, there's going to be holes and flaws in it that you aren't seeing. That's the problem I have with, his plan of fixing the world. He's not understanding what makes, like the encyclopedia that he read. Why did he get so much from it? He got to see not only the strengths, but the weaknesses of those people. And we learn from those things. If you craft a quote-unquote perfect world, one of two things is going to happen. Either it's going to be incredibly dull, or eventually the world is going to continue down that same path again. Because people aren't perfect. Even he's not perfect. A perfect person would not have destroyed that kid's leg. It was unnecessary. That was not needed to solve that problem. Showing the kid that you can defend yourself, a bully is a coward by their nature. That's why they're doing it. They tend to prey on people that they perceive as weak. So once you show a bully that you're no longer weak, they're done with you. They're going to move on to the path of least resistance. They're kind of like a bear. Does a bear go out of its way to try to attack people? No, they're going to tend to leave and go on to the path of least resistance. But, they're going to tend to seek out smaller prey. A bully is, very similar in that type of situation. They're going to run. That's going to be it. This kid was already running and his leg was shattered. And I think that just shows an inherent flaw in Veet's character. And I think am I pronouncing it right even? I've pronounced his name so many. If anybody listening to this, if it's Veit and not Veet, just bear with it, because I've pronounced his name Veit. I've pronounced it Veet. I don't know if I'm doing it right or wrong. He's one of the characters in Watchmen. I've got in my head how I pronounced him when I read Watchmen. I've got in my head how he was pronounced in the movie, and I don't know which version I'm using right now. And I apologize ahead of time if I'm pronouncing his name wrong. Do you know?
I would say Veit is how it's pronounced. And the only reason why I'm guessing that is because I know a lot of times an E has an I sound if you're dealing with, overseas and, the old country. Okay. It would be Veit instead of Veet, So that's my guess. I don't remember how they did it in the movie.
Adrian.
And I always said Veet. In my head, when I was reading this, I always say Veet, but it's probably Vite.
We'll call him Adrian.
Adrian, I think, is probably best, because I also mess up Ozymandias. For some reason, I just call him Ozzy, because then I start thinking Crazy Train and Ozzy Osbourne and stuff like that. But get back serious conversation. On your comments about with him not having not having somebody, a confidant, that is actually a really true and just accurate statement. Is probably one of his greatest character flaws, is that he doesn't feel anybody is worthy of his confidence. Anybody is a worthy advisor to him, and it's his arrogance and just his that feeling of self-worth, self-importance, that he doesn't feel anybody could be worthy enough to be that confident. No one could be, on his level. And you see that at the young age. And had he talked to his parents, had he talked to his dojo master, because I'm sure when he was there, he was just probably talking to them, learning from them, but not confiding in them, not saying, hey, I'm being bullied at school, I need to figure out how to deal with this. Because if he had, that master probably would have said, there's a lot better ways than just beating them up. You can show them, a lot of the stuff you said, where you show them your strength and they will back down. Well, he probably didn't tell his sensei what was going on. He probably didn't share with him. And again, that's Adrian's character. That's who he is. He's going to deal with it his own way, what he thinks is best, because he is the smartest man in the world. He knows what's correct. And he shattered the kid's leg, and I did laugh, however, when they're talking about, we're saying the boy will probably never walk normal again. Perhaps Jerry's limp will serve as a constant reminder of his poor judgment early in life. One can only hope. That right there, that one line just cracked me up. And then his dad's like, Adrian, please, now is not the time. And the dad's like, bobbing and weaving. He's trying to smooth things over. And this sequence, it's more that groundwork for why Adrian is Adrian and why he does what he did.
Now, Adrian should have been punished for what he did. Now, first of all, let's clarify something. Bullying's not right. And I think it's important to defend yourself when it comes to a bully. There's a difference between defending yourself and assaulting somebody. He assaulted the bully. There's a huge distinction between the two. I see bullying all the time at school. And there's bullying that goes on at school that I don't see with my kids. That's part of the reality of it. As a kid, there were situations where I was bullied. I think I take bullying very seriously. So anybody listening to this, don't take it. Bullying's horrid. But I think there becomes a different extreme where you become a bully. In that moment, first of all, Adrian should have been, taken aside and told, hey, this kid was bullying you. You were right to feel the way you were, but that doesn't solve the problem. You didn't defend yourself here. You assaulted the kid. There's a difference between the two. Defending yourself, even, punching the kid and getting the kid to run away is different. I would have had a huge distinct difference here if the kid had a black eye than his leg shattered. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Once he became that deadly weapon, he now has become the bully. He shattered the kid's leg. That was unnecessary as a way to handle the situation. Instead, what Adrian was taught here was, it doesn't matter what you do. As long as we can throw enough money at the situation, you can solve your problems however you see fit. We'll just throw money at it. He does this later as Ozymandias. He uses money and in his training and throughout his life as a way to a lot of times get into doors and open doorways to solving problems. It's one of the reasons why developing wealth becomes a big thing for him. He's throwing money at situations to craft the world and craft situations in a way that he sees fit. He was taught that here. This was one of the pivotal moments in his life where, you know what? Like, he was going to be expelled, and the dad's buying a library to keep him from being expelled. There's no consequence to Adrian for what he did. And that's something that, you never see at any point in time him having to work off the library that was created. Do you see it? No, where dad said, look, I built this library to keep you in school, but you better understand, because you shattered this kid's leg, yes, he was a bully. I understand what led you down this path, and bullying's never right. And I do believe in supporting him there, but it's not okay to shatter a kid's leg either. Two wrongs don't make a right, that old theory there. I think there's a huge difference between a kid getting a black eye because he was bullying a kid too much and a kid having his leg shattered. And Adrian was never taught that in that pivotal moment. I love that I got so into this story that I'm looking at this kid was taught that it was okay because money could be thrown at it. And then his parents are killed, and this is who this guy is. He's still very young at this point. Now he's got all this wealth, and he's got to decide, where am I going to go? Well, I've been set on this path since a childhood of being a conqueror. So I am going to follow the path of a conqueror. Well, there's a reason why, as cultures, hopefully we've evolved somewhat since the days of the conquerors. The world isn't the same place as it was back then. I think we can learn from history, but we shouldn't use the life of a conqueror from the past as our only template for who we're going to become. We should also use today and real people and real friendships that we develop as a basis. This is a kid who's not rounded off. He's using only history, only his love of heroes. And could you imagine, we're comic book fans. Could you imagine if my only source of inspiration was Batman? That's what he's doing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I'm a Batman junkie. I love Batman. My life is not modeled after Batman. Are there things I've learned reading Batman comic books about right and wrong? Absolutely. But gosh, would that be a scary place to be around me if I I dressed up as Batman, I ran around fighting crime, I was gruff, I distanced myself from it. First of all, we wouldn't be doing this or having this conversation right now because Batman doesn't have time for that. My whole path on life would be very different because I'm following the path of my hero. There's a difference between learning from history and embracing it. Going on this trip to learn things would be one thing. He's going on this trip to model his life after all this. Continuing the same terrible path he went on his childhood of, look, he's become the bully. The guy's coming up behind him, don't even think about it. And he's fully prepared to do to these guys what he did to the kid. And I'm not saying he's wrong because these guys are thugs and everything, but realistically, look how hard-edged he's become as life goes on. And he's following, the life of pharaohs. Well, okay, there's a lot to learn from pharaohs. There's also a lot to learn that was wrong from pharaohs. And what they did with their slaves and with things like that. You shouldn't model your life after pharaohs. That era is out of date. Oh my gosh. Pharaohs had slaves and things. That wasn't that's nothing to admire. You know what I mean?
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah, and it's funny because you throw out the term out of date, and that's one of Adrian's biggest, it's, again, another one of his big weaknesses of his character and who he is. He is factual information. He is not personal information. He'll sit there and he can study people, and he could probably tell, after hanging out with someone for probably a couple minutes, he can probably tell you everything about them. Because he's that attentive to detail. He looks at the little subtle and histories and the little nuances of character because he's disciplined his mind that much. But he couldn't sit there and tell you who they were out of personal experience. He couldn't be that person. He couldn't be, it's not he doesn't have that personal connection. He doesn't have that personal friendship. He doesn't have those personal relationships. It's only the factual information of what people do. It's only the factual information of what is and what was. And that's again, it's, he's a person, a discipline that you have and you respect, but it's also I'm being choked right now, by the way. I just had a special guest walk into the studio right now. It's my absolutely super fabulous niece, Cassie.
Hi, Gail Simone. You're amazing.
Even though we're not talking Gail right now, but yes, that sentiment's always thrown out.
Gail's always relevant.
And here's the thing. I'm not even forcing her to say that. That's just on her own.
No, she was choking you, which is great. So, one of the points I want to make about him and with his path of following Alexander and looking at the pharaohs and admiring them, part of the problems with some of those leaders were they were disconnected from the people. He is disconnected from the people. He doesn't admire people, current people who are alive today. He looks at them as lesser. Once you start looking at anybody as lesser, especially large groups of people as lesser, you've disconnected yourself from the realities of society. That's the problem when you look back at pharaohs. Like, I love Egyptian architecture. I love looking at all that stuff. I don't want to be a pharaoh. I don't admire their lifestyle. I don't admire the way they live. I can look back and admire the artistry of that era and certain bits and pieces and elements of it. Sure, you can admire a lot of that stuff. I mean, the amazing things that groups of people did. I mean, they built those pyramids. But if you look at the way that those pyramids were built, the horrid things they did to people to build those pyramids, you shouldn't admire that. And these are the people that he's templating himself after. This is why this guy starts heading down a path of, well, in order to fix things, let's throw a bunch of money at it and kill millions. I mean, that's not okay. And that's all because he thinks that certain people aren't valid and worthy of life. Who is he to judge that? I have major problems with him. It's funny how this series has more... I understand where he's coming from and how he arrived at his conclusions, but it's where I have major philosophical problems and moral problems with him. And I think that's due to a well-crafted miniseries that in 2 issues has put me to a character that I'm like, wow, he just does not, for as smart as he is, he doesn't have an emotional connection. That emotional component is gone for him. It shows up from time to time, but when it does, because he never learned how to properly handle and channel his emotions, he's never had an emotional outlet, he handles things so horribly wrong to such extremes that, he never cries. Like, even his parents' death, there was no, remorse. It just drove him to further continue this path of being the conqueror. And every little step has led him to be a conqueror. He looks at, even the girlfriend when she dies, and I know I'm jumping to this, when she dies, it continues him down this path of conquering drugs and conquering the people running it. And I mean, it's all conquering, destroying, ruining, tearing apart, breaking down to make things and mold them into the way he sees fit. And that's not the real world. You can't do that with everything. You can be an agent of change where you inspire. There's nothing he's doing that's really inspirational, though. It's just the opposite. He's not doing anything to connect with the world and inspire it. He feels that the world can't be connected with and inspired. And that is something on a philosophical level I have just a huge problem with. He feels that he wants to put, in his own way, people under his thumb. And those that won't be under his thumb, in many ways, he's worse than the conquerors in the past. We'll just destroy you. We'll ruin you. We'll kill you. Done. That's his philosophy. And I think that builds over time. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just completely co-signing on some of your just analogies of him, because his problem is the lack of the emotional response, the lack of that normal. As a child, we have these regular interactions, and some are positive, some are negative, but you do have that human connection, that learning. Part of the strength of school isn't just the base knowledge that we learn, it's those social skills. He never had that. As he's growing up, he's sitting in the Gunga diner, studying the stock market, figuring out how I'm going to make my fortune so I can conquer the world. And this beautiful woman's hitting on him, and any normal man would put down that newspaper, say, "Hey, how you doing?" And would pursue that, not him. He's like, "Actually, I prefer to be alone." While she's, flat out just saying, "Hey, let's do something. Hey, come on." And even after they get together, he's later very detached from it. It's about this process. He's got this semi-naked woman lying in his bed, and he's more focused on, his stock markets, on his investments, on the money, on the business, on everything growing there, as opposed to what should be an obvious distraction for him. An obvious attention should go to that. No, I must focus on this. And that, in the end, is what leads to her death. The fact that he just keeps ignoring her. He throws some money at her. She goes and gets the drugs, ODs, and dies. Had he had some connection with her, had he actually, instead of focusing on the building of this building, which, to be honest, when you get to this certain point in time of the construction, the plans are already done. You let the people who know what they're doing actually do it. Well, Adrian doesn't trust anyone but himself. Well, no one could possibly oversee this as well as he could because he, again, is the world's smartest man. He is this perfect human. So he's going to not trifle with the quote-unquote little details like his girlfriend. Had he actually spent time with her, had they gone out, she would still be alive. And after she dies, he, again, doesn't have any acknowledgement. There's a thing called survivor's guilt that a lot of people will deal with in any different circumstance, whether it's if you're in a combat situation, you're in a violent situation, or whether you're the partner that doesn't die from an accident or anything like this. Everybody always goes through it. When someone close to you dies, you naturally, a normal human reaction is, what if I had been there? What if I had done this? Could it have been different? Adrian never lets that thought enter his head. He never even has that moment of remorse or guilt when he's sitting there staring at her dead OD'd body lying on their bed. It's not about, maybe I should have spent more time with her. Maybe I should have done this. No, it's about, okay, I have to stop the people who did this. This is my new, I will conquer them. I will defeat them as I've done everything else. And that's part of the mindset and part of that who he is that leads us down to this path of the person who kills millions of people in the quote-unquote, pursuit of peace.
Jim, he's never been told he's wrong.
Right.
He's never been told he's made a mistake. Even that whole conversation with the principal, something must be done to, make peace with the parents, let them come to terms with what's happened here. So it's really, they're making an example of him because this kid will never walk again, not because he did something wrong. There was a distinction if you look through that conversation. He's never scolded, never told he was wrong. It's more like he's told to hide himself, to, control what people see of who he is because they're wrong. They won't understand him. And that's his whole life from his childhood was crafted to show, you're right, they're all wrong. And to have that modeled, everybody's wrong. Everybody makes mistakes. That's part of being human. We're not a perfect, and God, that's the greatest thing about all of us, is we're not perfect. We learn from each other from our strengths and weaknesses. We all have strengths. We all have weaknesses. And hopefully you build a friendship group and an acknowledgement of people who, whatever weakness you have, your friend might have that as a strength. And you build off of that and learn from each other. He never has that in his life. That's why he does build a relationship with Miranda, because we might as well talk about her because you're bringing her up and she's in the diner. He does talk about how his fortune grows and so does his attraction, but he still doesn't have this sense of he's cold, distant, aloof. He doesn't, not aloof, but he's cold and distant and calculating. He never learns how to embrace the fact that the cool thing about Miranda is she is so different from him. And that there's really neat things about her because of her strengths, her love, her, attractiveness and all that type of thing, but also her weaknesses. And as a couple, if they had learned how to deal with those weaknesses together, he might have been a stronger man. If he learned how to see the warning signs that he was pushing her away, that he was putting her in this position where she was going to go to these clubs at night. But again, he threw money out at it again.
Yeah.
He's got a problem with her, so what did he learn as a child? Well, okay, you can't build an empire by wasting time. I can't waste time. Where she's just saying, we need some alone time together. We need some couple time. We need some time to interact. The stuff that he doesn't have time for because he was always told to push yourself, push yourself, push yourself. That's what Dad did with businesses. You're going to become the president. You're going to become the conqueror. Conquerors are people that distance themselves from others and only focused on what they were conquering, the ones that were the most successful ones throughout history. But their inherent flaw was a lot of times there was flaws where they didn't understand their people and the plight of their people. He's modeling himself after that, and there's somebody who he has said he has fondness for, who he's watching and not realizing because he's not paying attention, is going down this horrible path because he's just given her tons of money and an emotional twist where she goes to this underground club of drugs with Moloch, which I love that kind of ties into things we saw in like The Comedian, with the drugs that was going on there. This is a guy who has been a drug dealer. He's on this underground drug scene. And we're seeing a much earlier Moloch, because this is a younger Moloch than we saw in that. And seeing that everything the comedian was eventually going after was a part of Moloch's world, even if he got the place horribly wrong. But I love that we're seeing, because this is a villain who we see in Watchmen as somebody who's being interrogated for the potential death of the comedian. But we never really got to see what he was like in his prime. We're seeing how just creepy and twisted this guy is, because I think he full well knew there was a possibility she was going to have an overdose. He was looking at dollar signs.
Well, he was looking at dollar signs, and it was probably experimenting, saying, let's see what works with this drug.
Right.
Let's try this one. Because she didn't have anything specific. She said, surprise me. It's like, oh, okay, let's see if this one kills her. If this doesn't kill her, it'll probably be a really great high, and I'll get more business out of it.
But also, let's get her addicted. The more that she's taking and ingesting, the more her body's going to need it. So he was probably trying to push her. I don't think he was trying to kill her, because why would you do that dollar sign-wise? But I think that because she's got money. So she's walking in there with money, so I think he was looking for a repeat customer. The problem is he gave her way too much to try and make her an addict. I think you're trying to rush to make someone an addict by overdosing them that much, with the intent that, hey, when she comes down from this, she's going to need more of this, because she's obviously escaping something. That emotional, she kept probably asking for more and more to hide out her pain.
Mm-hmm.
It's a creepy, creepy world that's being crafted here. And, his way of handling it, once again, there's no grieving process. He uses this as a time this is where I'm going to don my costume. This is where I am going to. It's funny, when he puts on the mask, he's another guy. When the mask is on, there's no distinction between the guy with the mask on and the mask off. That is 110% who he is when he puts on that mask. He's using the mask as a way for himself to operate and do the creepy things that he shouldn't be doing.
Oh, definite. And it's one of the things that, kind of like, I like seeing. I don't want to say I like seeing it, because it's a tragedy why he came about. Because you never really had that whole story. You never really had why he came from, where he came from. It was more of this. Initially, I got the feeling he was going about this, the whole process. When I read Watchmen, he was one of those guys who was stepping up to be the hero to do the right thing. And you see the dark underbelly side behind why he became the hero, why he started doing this process. And even though in the issue you physically see him say, oh, Miranda, I'm sorry, it's all my fault, I never once felt that he actually believed it was his fault. He never really felt he never felt he was wrong. He never felt he did anything, that he ever made a mistake. And I think those are just more of words and a statement from him, not actually the emotional guilt behind it.
Yeah. I like when he starts exploring this whole drug underworld. You see where you've got these guys who are dealers, and, they're looking at what amount of money is it going to take for me to branch off on my own, to become one of the bigwigs, to make the big money. I don't want to just be the guy on the street. I want to be the one that has people underneath me. And what is that? It's scary that the drug world is kind of like Amway. Your ultimate goal is to get people under you. I'm not insulting anybody who does Amway. I don't mean it that way. But I'm saying it's their idea is to get people under them that are dealers that will do the job for them. And it's the difference between Amway. That's a whole different ball game. Of people trying to sell legitimate things. Whereas in this case, you've got somebody who's trying to sell drugs and get people under them to do the work for them so they can make the big, big money. And it's a scary, scary, creepy world. It's
the networking. It's the game. It's funny because when you study like the actual drug market and the drug trade, and you just start seeing legitimate business practices that kind of work in the drug trade, and
that's what I was going for.
Successful drug dealers are guys who's actually men and women who've actually had some business training. They've actually taken college course. They've learned the basics of business 101, the structuring, and they stop going through just the general street thug mentality and saying, you know what? This is a business. I'm going to handle it like a business. I'm going to make money like it's a business. And it's kind of funny that, this different character studies and different, cartels and just the various, organizations that I've read about have been, and you see these connections to the military. You see these connections to the business world. You see this general understanding and kind of symmetry between them that it's kind of scary.
The Amway thing, where it came from, is I had a friend of mine when I was in college. I was in the first couple of years in college who had done Amway. And he had gotten people under him, was trying to get me to do it. I told him, I said, if you're already the guy who's getting people under you, I said, where do I go? The idea is for you to get more and more people under you, which is what you wanted me to do. But I said, it's this area. So if you're already taking on that role, then I'm not going to be able to take on that role. So I'm going to be stuck being the dealer. Using it as an analogy for this right now. So, he was doing it as perfectly legitimate. I'm not knocking Amway, but I'm saying, I kind of connected with that. This guy right now doesn't understand that the drug dealer in the area, the bigwig in the area, is not going to let him become that guy. They'll rub him out the second that he tries to become that guy because he becomes competition now and taking away from their financial bottom line. So they ultimately don't want him to become – they'll only let him go a certain distance. And then if he becomes any more powerful than that, he becomes a liability. It's a creepy world because of that. I don't know, it was just something that I connected with in that moment. And seeing Ozymandias go into this, and once again, his whole idea is, let me find out who the people are running it. But I don't get the idea that he's doing this to make the world a better place. It's more of to find this information to kind of, how do I take power in a world where these guys are running the show? I always feel like his motivation for doing everything is, how do I take down the infrastructure so I can control the world? And I think that's where his motivation is flawed. He's not a hero. He's not doing this for the intrinsic person. You don't see him mentally thinking, I'm going to take care of the girl on the street who's the junkie. His focus is totally on the drug dealer. You never see him trying to help the person who was, the lady who was in the all covered up there. Mm-hmm. Do you have what I need? You don't see him saying, hey, you need to get yourself some help. You need to enroll yourself in a program. You need to, here, let me help you get a job. I know this guy, Adrian, who has a company. Maybe we can get you in at the starting floor, and this will be a chance for you to turn your life onto a new path or something, as long as you're doing these things. Using his alter ego the way you sometimes see Bruce Wayne do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
This guy isn't motivated that way. It really is about breaking down infrastructures, breaking down things that are painting the city in a way that he finds unacceptable. But it's never about evoking a change that will improve the human condition, because I don't think he understands the human condition.
It's not about inspiring hope. It's about just beating up the bad guys. It's, when you look at characters like Superman and Batman, yeah, he is the gruff, beat up the bad guys, but there is that side of him where he, as Bruce Wayne alter ego, will try to help out. Superman takes care of the big stuff, but then tries to inspire the little people to rise up. Adrian has no desire to inspire anybody. He has no desire for the everyday person to make their life better. It's about, I need to do this, this, and this, and this for my end game. And that's where he's going, and that's his process that he's going through this. He could have tried to help people. He could have tried to, the amount of money that he has already. Did he ever think to, help with rehab centers, help junkies get off the stuff, or donate money to clinics that would actually do the right thing and would actually help people, as opposed to, or some organizations out there that take the money, they spend part of the money on just helping people, and then the rest goes to lining pockets. And there's the whole bureaucracy of the service and the charity organizations that you have to deal with. Adrian could skip all that because he already has the money and the resources, but that doesn't enter his head. No, I'm going to break down the criminals. I'm going to beat them up. I'm going to take out the bad guys. I'm going to show them that I am better than they are. That's all. That's his mindset. That's where he's going. If he had a confidant could have said, hey, you got to, help out the people who are affected by these drugs. Help out the people who need that hand up, who need that help, who need someone in to help pull them out of the darkness. You could be that person. Well, he doesn't have anyone telling him that. He doesn't think that, so he's going to go down this path that he thinks is the correct way for him.
In that Porcini and Hondo situation where you see the girls who are the workers, here's a distinct difference. Silhouette, who I think Silhouette's a true hero. Silhouette, if she walked in on that situation, her first concern would have been not only how do I save the lives of the girls from collateral damage, because Adrian does do that. He tells the girls in their language to hide so they don't get shot. Okay, so I got to give him credit for that. But she would have been, instead of being so focused on taking all of the bad guys down, which she would have been focused on, but her motivation for taking the bad guys down would have been so I can get the girls out of here safely and hopefully correct some of the injustices done to them. He has zero concern for that. He's not going to let collateral damage happen, if possible. So I do think that there is something good in that. But I don't think there's any, I have no doubt in my mind, there was nothing done by him. It would be the police who came in to clean up if the girls happen to still be there, who might do something for the girls. It's not going to be him. And I think that's, to me, are you a hero or are you another form of bully?
Are you a vigilante? Are you a hero or a vigilante?
Yeah.
Adrian's a vigilante. He's not a hero.
Yeah. And in many ways, a vigilante, a straight vigilante, is a form of a bully. They're justifying their use of aggression because they're beating up people who are labeled as bad, which they are. I mean, I'm not. Don't get me wrong; these guys are bad guys, so I'm not saying that. But to me, what separates Batman from being, at least my definition of a vigilante and what makes him a superhero, is that Batman is concerned by the human condition and hopefully changing the human condition to better everybody. This guy isn't concerned with that. He's convinced that the human condition is inherently wrong, and he's going to change it to make it the world that he thinks it should be. Not the world that... And I think that's where you start to become pompous, when you start thinking you know what the world should be better than anybody else. And that's who he is. That's what he thinks. And it's funny, the more read-throughs I did of this, I think I was a lot more in my first read-through sympathetic to him than I was in my third read-through. My third read-through, I wanted to punch him. And it was funny how your tone will change because the action sequences are the same. The high moments are the same in every read-through. But this is where it gets into a big psychological thing, because when he shows up on the scene in this one and he's throwing the garbage through the doorway, and we see this wonderful action sequence, that page with yellow where everything's silhouetted with him, it's all in black. And you get to see mentally just how well he's trained himself to analyze the intelligence. I've analyzed every possible outcome, and this is the one where I will I'll definitely accomplish my goal of taking everyone down, including the bigwig who's probably going to try to sneak up behind me. I mean, what a brilliant show of this guy's intelligence and his skill set and what he brings to the table. But he's so focused on facts and figures and mathematical probabilities that he is not connecting emotionally with any of what he's doing.
Yeah, it's funny because when you get to that... I'm sitting here. It's funny. As you're talking, I'm nodding my head a lot, going, yeah. But speak, Jim. You need to talk.
No. I don't, yeah.
But I was sitting there. I was in complete agreement with you on your groove on Adrian and where he was going. But this art sequence, we talked earlier about just how breathtaking. This yellow and black sequence where it's showing Adrian doing his thing. This is a 2-page spread that I can't tell you how long I have stared at this page, just staring at this page, just showing, again, it's the motion the flow, but it's completely different than the other pages because it's just using the two main colors. There's not showing this. Normally, I like seeing a little bit of like that motion effect, kind of like the ripples in the air and whatnot to try to show movement. With this, you don't have any of that. You just have the two basic colors, but because we have all this brilliant boom art, then we go to this and these two pages, it is such a dynamic effect on me. Yeah. I was like, this is some really cool stuff, and this is a really cool way to do this sequence, especially because you start thinking about how non-emotional Adrian is and his approach to all of this stuff. The fact that we have a non-emotional artwork to describe, to explain just this. It's pure methodology. It's pure mathematical. It's pure just boom, 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 laid out how he was going to fight these guys. This, for me, was a great way to show it because it lacked those beautiful facial expressions, those beautiful, just that dynamic that we were getting on all the other pages. It kind of was like one of those system shock, boom, gets you right into the moment, and you really can just sit there and study the flow, and then it goes right back to the artwork that we had before. I was just like, this was a page that really just caught my attention and just always gives me pause and just reflection, and it actually is a way to kind of, again, showing just who and what Adrian's about.
It's funny, if you just read it on a surface level and just look at that page on a surface level, it looks like, or two pages, I should say, it looks like the most simplistic page, if you look at it that way, because, it's just a basic color scheme of yellow and black. But then if you really study it, it's actually the most complex. It's delivered. I mean, the amount of motion and action and well thought out planning that is being developed on this page, it's one of the most complex set of pages in the whole thing. And you're right, the choice is really it was a great artistic choice. The whole creative team really delivered on this. It is funny how you look at it at first and go, wow, that's simplistic colors for the action sequence, and it was everything you said it was. It was so the other things did not distract you from what they really wanted you to see, the flow that they really wanted you to go through in all this. What a beautiful couple of pages here, and I love the artistic choice because it just that to me is what one of the great things about comics are. When you've got true masters of the craft, they play with it. And I love that, my favorite comics are the ones where creators are playing with storytelling. They're trying different things on certain pages to convey certain emotions, to focus us certain ways. That's what shows that they're masters. And I think this art form does things that, really should be in museums. When I go to the art museum, I love going to the art museum. I did it in California when I was there. I love our Cleveland Museum of Art. I always marvel at what people are able to do when they start putting these tools to paper or canvas or whatever. And there are pages like this, and, throughout our discussions in the years we've been doing this show, so many comics, we've talked about that have just had sequences and pages like this. And they're not always splash pages, they're sometimes where just the artist has done something with the visual storytelling that just was clever and interesting and unique and different and unique to them. They're trying to do something that maybe they've been influenced by 5 or 6 other people, and they're taking those parts and putting them together to try something new. And I don't know, this is one of those series. I go back to that series, The Shield. I don't know why this particular sequence, I think just because of the visual styling, took me back to that one. And Marco Rudy did the artwork on that one in front of the show, Art Lion. And the stuff they were doing with the paneling structure and the artistic structure on that, kind of this reminded me of what I liked about that. I'm not saying this is like that in this visual styling, but it's just unique. It's different. This page setup was unique to me. It looked really, really cool. And this is the kind of stuff that I think comics don't get enough credit among the art culture for the talent of the people and what they deliver in these books. I really, really don't. In a very limited time frame that these creators have, they deliver stuff that is just mind-blowingly stunning. And I think a lot of times they aren't given the credit that they deserve. And I do hope that's something at some point that changes, because this type of stuff just makes me, once again, glad that we do what we do, with podcasting because we get to shout out just how good all of this is. Because this was good. This is really I was really excited to talk about this book because of the visual styling. I'm a Jay Lee fan. And this really, wow, just delivered.
Oh, big time. And I just actually was at the Cleveland Art Museum with because my niece is in town and she's an artist and going to be going to Drexel University in Philly, and I'm very proud of that, by the way.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah. We took her to the art museum, my sister and I, and just to show her that Cleveland does have some art and some culture because she's from New Jersey, and she's had exposures onto that level of those art galleries in that area, New York City, et cetera, et cetera. So we showed her, hey, Cleveland has some art. We've got some style to us as well. Not as much, but we do have it. And it was kind of cool because the Cleveland Museum of Art has all the various, and it's as a child, I've the growth and just me as a person, what I used to, when we were kids, we'd go to the art museum because you had to for elementary school, and you always wanted to go into the armor room because I always like seeing all the suits of armor and all the cool stuff there. The other stuff, I'm like, I don't want to see that. But this time going there, and there's been a lot of the modernisms. There's art from the 20s. There's this huge exhibit that's going on right now at the museum where it's this artwork from the 20s. Artwork, it's paintings. There's the early prints from there. There's a couple sculptural type, thingies. I don't know the exact terminology for it, but it's a combination of art, painted art, and physical stuff. So
that is the correct technical term: sculptural type thingies.
Yes, but it's all from this era, all from this time of American history, and these are all American artists who created this, and it was kind of neat seeing these different styles. And then as we go through that room, we go to the Renaissance era. Then we go on to the modern art era, and you start seeing like some of the more what people would consider like a comic book style artwork to it. And these are these paintings made by famous people hung up on the wall that you're just like, wow, that's, and I'm looking at it going, that could be a page from a comic book, just the style of it. So it's the whole interpretation of art. You get the one very famous guy who throws splatters of paint up against the wall, up against the canvas, and I can't think of the guy's name. And actually, I think some of the pieces I saw were kind of cool. I was like, oh, that's kind of neat. You sit there, stare at it for a little while, and you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. And sometimes I'm looking at a piece of artwork and I'm saying, okay, I don't get it. It's just there was one wall that it was literally they drew a pencil pattern on the wall, and it was just like straight lines this way, straight lines going this way, but it was literally drawn on the wall. And I saw this blank wall, and I'm looking at it going, okay, wonder what happened to the exhibit, thinking something got taken down. And she's like, oh no, that's right there. See the pencils? Like, oh, okay, that's the artwork? You're like, yeah. I'm like, I understand. And I didn't get it, but it was like, okay, it's the style, it's the flow. And you take those type of events and that type of stuff I'm seeing, I look at the stuff on these pages, and it's, you kind of get an appreciation and broadening your scopes for what you call art and what you think is cool, what you think is just this,
one of the things that as you're talking about this, neither of us, and I was joking with you before when you were saying that, I don't know the technical terms either. I took art appreciation in high school and college. Largely I enjoyed it, but sometimes it can get dry for me, especially when you start getting into the technical terms. Because I don't know, I like going to a museum. I like to mosey my way through. I love to just take a look at artwork that I enjoy. I'm not worried about the correct terminology. I just kind of embrace the whole experience. I'll stop at the pieces that I really like and think about them and, make my own decisions and interpretations of them and just kind of move along and really just kind of enjoy and embrace the experience. I guarantee you that, I've gone to the Cleveland Museum of Art since I was a child at various times, and I know for a fact that my focus on what I've looked at has changed every time that I've gone there. And that's just based on mood and interest. I'll notice pieces of artwork that I didn't even notice that were there before. I clearly went through the same room before, but I just never looked at it, or maybe just mentally I was in a different place where it was a piece that I dismissed. You mentioned before a piece that I didn't get. Well, I'm the same way, but then the second time I go back or the next time I go back, I'll see that piece, and maybe that's the one I'm the most captivated by because I'm just in a different mindset when I go there. And I think that's the way art's meant to be appreciated. Not that there's anything wrong for anybody out there that knows all the technical terms and all that. You appreciate art too. You just do it in your own way. My background just isn't that. I don't have that background with it. I think I should say that I think art is meant to be appreciated in a way that's a personal experience. Some of our listeners are probably very technically proficient when it comes to art. So the way that they go about appreciating art is very personal to them based on their background and their exposure. I don't have that, but yet I still can appreciate it just as much. It just looks very different because I don't have that technical background. You don't have that technical background. Art is one of those things, though, I think that can bring us all together because we can all appreciate it. It just looks different. It's just unique. Art should be personal. And your experiences and your background should influence how you look at it and appreciate it and things like that. But I would encourage anybody listening to this, if you haven't gone to the art museum or an art museum in a long time and you have the opportunity to do it, go do it. Because anybody listening to this, if you're an art fan, if you read comics, a lot of times we've talked on this show how we're more story and script people. I think we say that because of the fact that we're not artists, and I think we're more comfortable saying that because we feel like we're more experts on that end. I would say as a comic fan, you're a fan of both. You really do have a high interest in both. Otherwise, you wouldn't be a fan of this. So I think, art and storytelling and all of that, I think all of those puzzle pieces that these wonderful creators craft every month is something we're all fans of equally. Otherwise, we wouldn't read this medium. We'd read just a book. Not diminishing books, but I mean, we would just read a novel because we're not into art. And we are, obviously, because we wouldn't. That's what the comic medium's all about. So I would encourage people to go to an art museum if you have not done it recently and really just kind of delve into that whole experience and go see the sculpture-like thingies and stuff like that are in there, because I do appreciate that as well. I mean, that's stuff that's terrific. And I was joking with you earlier because I thought it was funny that you were saying that, but I'm in the same boat as you. I don't know all the technical terms. Art appreciation class for me was always something that there was a lot that I enjoyed, but then there was a lot that was very dry, and usually it was when we got into technical terms because that's just not my interest. But the art I always liked. That was the part that was always interesting to me. Like when we look at different artwork, I love different eras of history, and seeing the artwork from different eras of history is incredibly interesting to me. And I can appreciate when you can look at something from the past and you can actually see some of its influences elsewhere. I don't know if I'm seeing it right as far as from a technical perspective, and I don't really care. I just like going to an art museum and just enjoying and absorbing that whole experience. And I think that, we can all go in there and appreciate it differently. I know, it's just kind of fun. I think when you talk about this book, it tends to lead to that kind of mental discussion. I think that's kind of cool that a comic will lead you to that.
Well, I'll tell you, I did appreciate the book even more after going to the art museum, after going to and seeing that, just because it kind of got me thinking, that artistic style got me thinking that way, got me, it kind of opens and broadens your horizons when you look at such a wide, massive variety of different artwork within a single afternoon. Because we spent a couple hours there just wandering through, and we had what we call the Italian saunter. It's just a nice, calm meander, kind of like how we had when we were over in Italy. Just that it's just a nice, calm, and easy stroll because we're not in a hurry. You're never in a hurry. You're just taking your time. You're taking in and seeing what's out there. And it's when I had that came back and I reread the books, to get ready for the recording. It was right after, spending some time there. So I was really looking at the artwork, really appreciating this stuff. And as we go through, we have these really cool action sequences. Then we start getting into Adrian, where he starts looking at the Minutemen, start looking at the past, of the heroes before him, and he doesn't want to make the same mistakes that they made. And I loved how, again, to distinguish between the research and between the modern, you have the more grayscale or the colorful current, colorful current stuff going on. But even that, just when, the initial simplistic of looking, okay, grayscale for the past, color from modern, because they want to distinguish it. Not even that completely. It's just like with the black and yellow sequence. This grayscale really do accentuate it and make it pop. You would think gray, grays and blacks, that's not going to be colorful. But that's something that my second and third read through that I really started noticing some of the look and the pain in, especially, Night Owl's eyes. You could see just that, the misery, the misfortune that he had to deal with. You can see a lot of just that focus of Hooded Justice and some with with Silhouette, how it showed that nice side shot of her. There was a lot of just use of non-color really accentuated it, really made things kind of make me go, oh, it's kind of cool. Again, it was an appreciation of the art styling they went for these couple pages just to make things up, just to mix things up, just to kind of shock the eyeballs.
It's funny when the police show up on the scene and we see him standing there. This adds to my sense that he's not a hero. This is their first introduction to him, and this is how he decides to present himself. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. It's one of those things where, I am so above you. Again, I'm above you. He talks about this worlds to conquer and stuff like that. It's not I'm one of you. I'm here to help you. I was thinking about the movie Amazing Spider-Man. It was released over the summer. Spider-Man's talking about how I'm doing your job and that type of thing and trying to really, in his own way, police are shooting at him. And he's like sitting here saying, no, I'm with you guys. We're on the same page here. Ozymandias has zero interest in being seen as one of them. He wants them to know he is above them. And that they should despair because they will never be him. They will never be able to handle things the way he can. They're just almost like ants to him, running around, like mice running in a maze. It does lead him, though, when he goes back to start and saying, okay, when I'm in this role of Ozymandias, I'm clearly accomplishing goals that I want to accomplish. But people that have come before me have fallen. They've vanished. They've retired. They've incompletely disappeared, for example, as Hooded Justice does. So he's studying them like he did the Conquerors to say, okay, how do I learn from the Minutemen and not fall into their trap? Not make the mistakes that they did. So he starts, the question that we all have, what happened to Hooded Justice? He starts investigating that. And that investigation leads him to find out that there's an Uncle Sam guy going after him, which ends up being the comedian, and leads him into this whole situation where he's got to I want to know. I hope in this, it's funny how there's some things that I don't want to know, because I think there's a reason why Moore left them vague. And I think this is one of the things that Moore deliberately left vague because he didn't want us to know. It's as these minis have been developing, and we've seen this pop up in so many of the minis in various different ways, including Moore's original work. I'm at a point right now where I'd like to see how some of these creators interpret this. What happened to Hooded Justice? Do you want to know?
I so want to know, but I don't want them to tell us, to be honest. I'm sitting there going, I gotta know. But I'm like, no, I don't want to know, because it's just that whole, I love the fact that every time I'm reading an issue, I'm thinking somebody different, or I'm thinking it could have been this. Hey, it could have been this. Hey, it could be this. There's so many different things that this direction it could have gone. And I think in the end, we're not going to see who the actual killer is. We're going to have some idea. We're going to have some understanding, but there's going to be, I don't think they're going to definitively say that blank killed the Hooded Justice. Here's how he died.
And let me clarify that. I don't care if they tell me or not. What I love is that so much emotion's been invoked in these miniseries where they're keeping me interested. Like, there hasn't been one of them yet where I'm not interested in the next issue. I'm not interested in what's going on. I love how I can feel like they're interconnected, even though they're not. They are and they're not, if that makes sense. They're separate miniseries that are clearly well crafted on their own, but they don't ignore each other either. Like, this clearly mirrors what's going on in Comedian and what happened in the Minutemen book.
Yeah.
And I like that. But yet, you don't need to be reading either of those to really enjoy this, and there's nothing, it's not a crossover per se. It's just that they haven't ignored each other. This book series is really tight from a creative standpoint for all the writers and artists editorially. Everyone involved in this has really done a very, very good job. There's nothing that I felt contradicted any of the other minis that are out there. And yet they've all stayed very true to their own tone, their own stories that they're telling. So I've loved that about this. And my hat's off to everybody involved across the board, because to do that and to pull that off is a monumentous undertaking, besides crafting minis that are on their own. You know, there's been times where, because we're going to be talking about books on the show, I will read single minis. I don't go back and read everything before Watchmen that was released in order to prepare for these. I focus on the books we're going to be discussing. I don't feel like I had to have read any of them to get into that groove. That's really, really a great way. I think you can read these a number of different ways, and I'm sure people listening are reading these books in their own unique ways to kind of absorb the information, whether they're reading them as they come out or they're just kind of stockpiling them and reading them a few issues at a time. Whatever you're doing, I think these books lend themselves to be read in a way. There's no right way to read them. And I applaud them for putting that Crimson Corsair, which we're not going to be able to talk about on this episode, we will talk about next week, that Crimson Corsair on the website. So if people aren't getting all the minis, they can still read all of that if they're only getting like their 2 pages in every issue of them, if they picked one mini to read. Like, let's say there were Ozymandias fans and they just read this. They can literally just read this and get all of the Crimson Corsair, even though they don't have it. I just applaud them for making that decision. Because, you know, a lot of times the thing is, well, you put this in there so we have to buy all the books. They didn't do that. I think their confidence that these books stand on their own is something that I really applaud. I'd like to see comic companies keep taking this, because it lets everyone be a part of these things no matter what their budgets are. I think all of these minis so far have really stood well on their own and are really valid and well worth buying. But I really applaud them for saying there might be that guy that can only read 1 or 2 of these, and or girl that can read 1 or 2 of these. And I don't know. I thought it was something that was really cool.
Oh, big time. Definitely enjoy it. And actually, I'm enjoying reading the Crimson Corsairs online. Because even though I have all the issues, for some reason, I like having them all boom, boom, boom. I'm just clicking next panel, and just continuing on.
I didn't realize the voicemail that we've got coming. You and I already recorded it. I didn't realize we were going to have such a big discussion on the DC Universe from it. So next week, what we're going to do is we're going to continue our Before Watchmen discussion. We're going to go to Rorschach for sure, Dr. Manhattan for sure. We're going to go to Crimson Corsair for sure, and maybe just touch on briefly any of the other issues, and that'll be our wrap-up of that. The week after that, we're going to be kicking off our Zero Month, which you'll have all your books by then, because we want to give ourselves enough time to read the Zero issues to be able to have our first initial discussion on it. We are going to kick that off like we did last year at this time, as a way to kind of gradually look at the entire DC universe. We're going to cover every single book that DC's publishing, take a look at the directions of all of them, and just give you, it's kind of a lot of where this voicemail is heading is where we're going to be going as a show. We're going to take a few months to look at the entire line again and just really kind of be all-encompassing on what our thoughts are on the entire line and the new directions a year later from where those books are. I'm excited to do that because there's a lot of books we have not had a chance to talk about in a long time, and there's new series we haven't had a chance to talk about that I would love to be able to talk about on the show. So that's where we're going over the next few episodes.
Look at those strange little beetles. They look... Great neutron!
I want to give a shout out to some sad news, actually. Bob Brundrett, friend of the show, made mention that Brian Kozicki from Buried Under Comics. Buried Under Comics is located in Manchester, Connecticut. He recently passed away, and this was a local comic retailer who he had a great attachment to. I haven't had an opportunity to go to the store, but I really was moved by this. Bob was basically just mentioning to me how this is a type of retailer who knew his customer base. And, it's really, I know from growing up, local comic shops, and even, sites like DCB Service that we deal with. We've encountered the people who work at DCB Service at many conventions. One of the great things about comic book retailers, when they're really good comic book retailers are, they know that this is a fandom base. It's a community base. And just from the way that Bob was describing him, Brian sounds like the type of guy who really just went out of his way to bring people into comics, make comics welcoming, make the audience welcoming, the consumers welcoming to comic books. I think there's a big difference. I mean, we've all been in those stores before where you go in there and it's clear that the person behind the counter could care less whether you've been there or not. Then there's those special stores where the people there really care about you. Sure, it's a business and they want to make money, but they also care about their customers and they build a relationship with them. And that's something that I think in this day and age is really, I think, more necessary than anything else, because there's a lot of competition out there for the comic book medium. So I think it's really great that Bob just was passionately connected to this gentleman and really felt the need to say, hey, and reach out and say, hey, could you just shout him out? Because this was something that was really important to me. So I'm really sorry for the passing of Brian Kozicki. I'm sorry for Buried Under Comics and any of the people who may be listening to this who shop at Buried or have shopped at Buried Under Comics in Manchester, Connecticut, because I know that that's a huge loss when there's somebody that you've connected with on that level. And, we never want to see any of us lose one of our own, especially when it comes to the comic community. I think we do have a community now. And I do think that's something in this day and age, that we're all interconnected through comics. And I think as kids, this is what we've always wanted. And I think comic book retailers were really the first people to open the doorway to having that interconnectivity when it comes to comics. Those comic shops were the original places where we could hang out and have these discussions that have branched out to the internet as well. So we got to remember, these retailers are the people that were the opening salvo and have continued to be the opening salvo to us being able to really enjoy this fan base with a community aspect. So apologies to anybody that this was affected by this.
Hey, Raging Bulleteers. This is Jason from the podcast that goes Nick. I wanted to ask a question about something that y'all haven't talked about in a while. I know when y'all first started doing the New 52, you talked a lot about, like, you had to make a top list, and you couldn't do it. But I just kind of wanted to look back on that, and now that we've got a full year under our belts of the New 52, kind of looking at the series, the different books from 1 through 12, do you have any that you think are like clear winners or maybe clear losers? I was a little bit surprised from a year ago what my top 5 would be. I think I would do like Batman, Green Lantern, Aquaman, which completely shocked me, Wonder Woman, which was another surprise. I've always liked the character, but never really got into her book. And then fifth one would be Nightwing. And then right below that would probably be like some very definite winners for the year would be Superboy, Justice League, and all the peripheral Batman and Green Lantern titles have also been really great. And I don't know, I mean, this is stuff I didn't necessarily read. I can't read everything. I'm definitely on a budget. I guess the only big disappointment to me of the first 12 issues of the New 52 was in the Superman core title. And I guess just because it didn't live up to its counterparts. I felt like the first year of action was great. Superboy was awesome. Supergirl was pretty dang good too. And I don't know, I feel kind of disappointed that for whatever reason. I know they had some creative troubles, but it felt like the Superman book itself, well, not bad, and it wasn't horrible by any stretch, but it just felt like it never really gained a clear direction. It just kind of fell flat. Anyway, I just want to know y'all's thoughts. So you haven't talked about it in a while. With a retrospective, looking back at the whole first year from start to finish, you know, what titles you're still as excited about as you were when they were new and starting off, and which ones, you know, maybe not so much. All right, well, thanks for listening, and thanks for doing the podcast. I love it, and keep them coming. All right, take care. Bye.
Hey, Jason, if you could please email me the name of your podcast, and I apologize. I want to listen to it. Actually, anybody who ever calls in with podcasts, I didn't catch the name, though, and I really want to make sure to, first of all, not only shout it out properly on the show, but I also want to check it out myself. So if you could please just shoot me a quick email and let me know the podcast name, because I got kind of garbled, which happens sometimes with voicemail, and I just want to make sure to shout it out. Jason asked some good questions. You know, we've had 12 issues now of this New 52. I'm enjoying the entire line, but obviously with any line, with any group of comics, you know, like Jason says, you know, we're all on budgets. I look at the previews catalog as just a candy store. I have to make decisions every month on what books I'm going to read. I'm going to have to say that I love this entire New 52 launch. I thought it was really great, but there are some favorites for me. What about you? Do you have, like, favorite books, or there's ones that are standing out 12 issues in? Has it changed at all, Jim, as the year's gone on? Because that's, I think, what he's really asking is, have your feelings changed? And then I'll throw my list in.
Well, there's definitely standouts for me. And there are books that, you know, when it first started up, I was like, oh, my God, I didn't think I'd really be enjoying this. and a couple that I knew were going to be good that I'm still just, oh my God, I'm still having a ball with it. I knew Batgirl would be good just because of, creative team. Gail writes the style that I like. So I'm like, okay, I was comfortable. I knew that was going to be good. The Bat titles really hit on all cylinders for me, and I was always the Superman guy as opposed to the Batman guy, but the Bat titles really came out with these really great massive stories that I was really enjoying and really pulled me into the universe. So all those Bat titles were pulling me in, and Aquaman just hit the ground running and has continued to excel for me. I think that's really is my big, I'm still loving this title, still eagerly anticipating the next issue of this title, just because this character is so cool and his supporting cast is so neat, and just everything that's being laid out within a confines of a quote-unquote normal story arc. It's not this massive event type story, but it still has that epic feel to it just because of the magnitude of what I'm reading. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Demon Knights is a title that I'm still loving. Yeah. It's one of those things where I don't like sit there and gush about it all the time, but every time I read, I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. This is neat. And it's a fun. Weird to say fun for it, but for me it is kind of a fun.
It's
read.
Wacky,
yeah, it's wacky. But no, I always sit there and I always will read it and enjoy it and just say, okay, that's a cool story. I want to keep doing this. I want to keep going with this title. It's funny he mentioned Superman. I love Superman. Superman, for me is just the great iconic character, but with the title itself. They've been telling these good stories. I've really been enjoying it, but I've never really been gushing or raving and saying, "Oh my God, this is great." And the reason I realized, a little while ago was the fact that there is no big monumentous event going on. And so when you start looking at everything going on in the other titles, they have these big monumentous events, and that's what's drawing my attention. That's what's pulling, just my energy towards. But when I sit down and I read Superman, I put it down going, yeah, this is Superman. I want to see where he goes. I want to see more of the past, the younger Superman, see how he became the character he is today, and just all these little pieces keep filling in. And I'm just sitting there like a sponge, just sucking all the information in, going, yeah. So I do have an energy towards Superman, but it's for some reason, I think because it's not a crossover, multiple title, type of story that I don't want to say I'm not as excited about it, because I am, but I'm not as outwardly open. I'm not as, boom, here it is. So it's, same thing with the Green's titles, all the events going on within all the different Green Lantern books and the Red Lantern book. And everything that's connected with that universe has been, again, another, whoa, kind of, this
I
is
love
huge.
that you're going through the entire line.
Hey, he asked.
No, he asked, what he's asking is, what are your top books?
I'm giving him my top books.
It's like all of them.
Yeah, pretty much. I'll say, and
no, I thought it was funny. Please, your rant on Green Lantern is actually really good. So please continue. I apologize. I just thought it was kind of ironic.
I can't pick a top 5. It's impossible for me. There's it's and it's, again, for me, I look at the groupings. I look at the pack. Like when I read Green Lantern Corps, New Guardians, and Red Lanterns, I think one. I don't think 4 titles. Stories aren't completely interwoven and interconnected, but I do think universally speaking, just like with the Bat titles, I think Batman Detective, Batman and Robin, Dark Knight, I think all of those as a connection. Then I think I have Nightwing, Batwing, Batgirl out there. And then I have, Red Hood and the Outlaws. I think of these things as one giant story and one giant connection. And for me, that's kind of how I list my top, titles. I'm like, okay, that's the Bat universe, that's the Superman universe, that's the Greens, and then I've got my other team books, I've got my other individual solo hero books, and I look at them at these broad categories, and I probably could pick an individual title that's the number one in all of those, but for me to say this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4, I can't. It's just the way my brain works, I would sit here and then I'd have my list, and then 10 seconds later it's like, no, what about this? Oh no. And it would be a constant fluctuation, and it kind of would, I think my head would explode.
Let's keep going then. You know what? I'll try to cut myself down to 10 just because that's always hard for me to do, and it's always fun to watch me try to somehow do that. And just kind of talk about the year, because I think his idea is summing up the year where you at. And you're doing that. And I was really only joking because I just thought it was really funny, and I was really enjoying your commentary. But first of all, Batgirl was a no-brainer for me. I'm a Gail Simone junkie. What really always works with her, first of all, she manages to wind up on these terrific projects with great art teams. I thought the art on Batgirl is just as amazing as the words. I felt anytime you've got a marriage of that, it's just, wow. Earth 2. Earth 2 delivered. It's James Robinson. I love James Robinson. It delivered on such an amazing level. I look forward to every issue. I know it wasn't out for 12 issues, and I'm going to throw in World's Finest with that just because they don't really fit his criteria of over the last year. Well, they do. You know what? I take it back. I'm going to leave. Those are 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to stick to what I said, 10. So we'll say 1, 2, and 3. Earth 2, World's Finest. For a lot of the same reason. I actually love seeing characters from that alternate Earth. I'm a multiverse junkie. I love the idea that DC has these worlds that it's not always so easy to get between, but characters do, and their reactions to the world, whether we're going to their world or they're coming to ours, you're always in a danger of overdoing that, and they've done a great job of not doing that, of keeping it something that they waited until Earth 2 came out to really show us. And when that happened, now we've got World's Finest in there. It's something that really in the latter part of the year we're getting exposed to versus the first half, and I really, really have enjoyed those. Batman. Scott Snyder has knocked this out of the park. I just think it's one of those books that every single issue has been just an amazing story, whether it's been in the whole Court of Owls, Night of Owls storyline or not. The stuff afterwards leading up to this Joker arc has been tremendous as well. So, it's a great, great book, and something just, to me, it's the flagship Batman title for me. And I think everyone has their own flagship titles, the one that's their go-to. Batman's been my guy growing up that I've always loved. The reason why I've loved him is you get these great creators who end up just doing amazing things with the character. And that's the key. I think Batman's going to sell well every month, regardless, because he's Batman. But what makes the difference between a regular Batman issue and a special Batman run is the creative team associated with the book. That's what we've got right now on Batman. We got a special creative team. The artwork is always stunning. Greg Capullo is doing just a terrific job. And that goes on to colors and everything. The whole creative team just really is gelled together to make that a phenomenal book. Batman and Robin. I want to shout that book out because a lot of times when I'm talking about Batman, I salivate over Scott Snyder's work. And I tend to forget to mention that book. It's one of those books, it's weird to say this, it's my sleeper hit Batman book, because every time I read the issue of it, I'm just blown away by the relationship between Bruce and Damian, and the focus on how Damian's being handled there, but also Bruce as the dad. You've got this son who's an assassin, and you're trying to teach him a better way, and he's put into so many of these moral questions that really fly in the face of everything he stood for as Batman. How does he support his son when he's being put in these positions when it involves things like death and murder and things like that, and trying to show Damian a better life? And Damian wants to, in some sense, please his father, but yet there's that part of him that philosophically has trouble with Dad's way of things. And I like that Damian just isn't instantly remorseful all the time of things that he does. He's his own person, and he believes a lot of these things. Because I think sometimes there's that danger of, okay, he's been with Bruce for, a year? Maybe 2 at the most? Where he's been that aware of his father at the most? And we're expecting that through his entire life he was groomed. I would say a year, right? Because if we've got the 5-year plan, timeline-wise, Damian's been with him about a year. So if you've got that kind of timeline with him, the expectation that since birth, he's been groomed to be one guy, and in 1 year that's instantly going to turn around is really insane. And I love the fact that this book flies in the face of that. And I love that even though we've got this kid that has these issues, you can't help but feel for him. feel something for him. He can be brash. He can be annoying. He can be rude. But then he also can be charming. He can pull at your heartstrings. Damian's like this full package that I never expected when the character was originally created. And Tomasi and crew have really done a great job of maintaining that. It's a book that a lot of times, and the reason why I'm doing a rant on it right now, I forget to mention because I'm so enamored by what is being done over in the main Batman book. But I think Batman and Robin is equally as valid a title in that family. You know, I love all of the Batman books. I'm going to pick them up anyway. But I do think the creative teams that are signed to all those books are really good right now. But those are my two standouts of the batch. So of the batch of the Batman books. You know, I'm talking about the ones just involving Bruce and Robin. Those books I just really wanted to shout out. Now, go ahead. Actually, and then we'll come back to my other five.
I was going to say that Damian's probably been there less than a year, dude. Because you think about... Well, less than a year with Bruce, because part of the time Damian was there, Bruce was dead, and it was him and Dick Grayson. So Damian's maybe been in Gotham for a year, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, and I agree with you on that one. I want to shout out in my other five, I want to shout out some surprises, because in the 12 months, there's some books that have been surprises. You know, this is going to seem weird to sound like a surprise, but Aquaman. Aquaman has just blown me away. Great writing, terrific art team. It's a character whose, relationship with Mira and the secrets we're learning about Atlantis. I was a big fan of the Peter David run. This is just as valid a run. This is exactly why there are really strong, loyal Aquaman fans, because when you get this kind of storytelling with the character, you really start to understand who he is. I love knowing more about his world. I want to know more about his world every month. I love the undersea creatures that we're getting introduced to. I love the real sense of danger. And I love that Aquaman and Mira's relationship is not an easy one. Both have had secrets from each other. And as a couple, they're going to have to learn how to deal with those secrets. How do you grow closer again because of it? I'm not saying that they've grown apart, but she was originally sent there to kill him. That's the white elephant in the room, right?
That's a tough one to get over. Yeah.
But then he's got all his deep dark secrets of the past with what happened with Black Manta and everything. That's one of the things that I've really enjoyed about that title, is these things that we don't know about their relationship. How they're dealing with it as a couple and getting past it, and supporting cast they're introducing. And there's more supporting cast to be introduced along the way. My big surprise in that book was Aqualad hasn't been introduced yet. And I'm not saying he should have been, because there really hasn't been a spot to do it. So creatively, they're doing the right thing. Don't put him in there yet. But I was under the impression, I don't know if you were under the same impression, that like in the first year we were going to get Aqualad. I'm not. They shouldn't have. They did everything right. But were you surprised that Aqualad didn't show up?
Big time. I was expecting, with the whole Manta story, who knows, we may get him out of this. But there was definitely, I was expecting to see some type of Aqualad presence, whether it's more of the, whether it's the new, Aqualad that we have out there, or if it's the older traditional, the one that we're used to, seeing that's been around. So I don't know. I was expecting I was expecting more Aqua family, more fish people.
Yeah. DC Universe Presents. This is a title I forget to shout out on the show, but I've been really digging. The Challengers of the Unknown arc, how they did that whole reality show thing, and just how dark all that got, I really, really enjoyed. But what really kicked up for me, one of the things I love about anthology titles, did you read the whole thing of that Savage story?
I still have one more issue of that. That's a title that, for some reason, always gets stockpiled on me. And I'll sit there and I stockpile it because I'm so focused on the big story, the big overall, the big bat titles, all the super titles, all the green titles. So it stockpiles. And then I got to go back to later after I have like a stack of them. I've like 2 or 3 left to read of that that's been stockpiled on that. So I got to go back and, jump on it. But yeah, that's another title that, when I sit down and I read it, I say, man, this is awesome. This is great, But for some reason, it always, just because of, I have to prioritize my reading, so I got to go with these first, and that can actually, you can compile those, and you read them together, and it's a great way to just kind of delve into the story.
Now, this whole Savage storyline, I'm going to be very general because I'm not going to ruin anything for you. The premise is his daughter, this immortal man Savage, the same Savage that we're seeing in Demon Knights, who's still around now. He's this horrible man who's done these horrid things over time. Now he's faced with his daughter, who is an FBI agent. And she's got to deal with this kind of morality because in what they're in the middle of, she needs to work with him. And because the two of them have to work together, she's faced with the situation of, this is my dad, and there are areas where I'm connecting with him and he's connecting with me, but he's a monster. And how do you deal with that? And it deals with that whole psychology. There's points in time in the story where I'm rooting for Savage, where I want to smack Savage. There's times where I'm rooting for the daughter, and I'm kind of like, wait, you can't be pulled into this. It's the kind of emotional roller coaster that you would expect from that type of storytelling, and it just delivered. It really needed to be delivered in this format. I'm hoping this book's getting some attention from readers, where you're, maybe if you're not reading it monthly, you're looking on an arc-by-arc basis on what storylines you might want to read, because it's an interesting title and you get a variety every month. To go from Deadman to Challengers of the Unknown to Savage to, Kid Flash. This book really has covered a lot of ground in 12 issues and a lot of diverse storytelling in there with great creative teams. And I don't know, the Savage storyline in particular was one that stood out for me. I really enjoyed Challenge of the Unknown and Deadman, but I would say my favorite storyline of the batch so far has been Savage, just because it was kind of edgy, it was a little dirty, just kind of a gritty, kind of family tough situation to deal with when you're dealing with a villain and his daughter who's really trying to be on the straight and narrow and be this FBI agent who really believes in what she does. So it's an interesting storyline, and it was just something that I really wanted to stand out. I also want to shout out, on the surprise end, Animal Man. Animal Man's been one of those titles for all 12 issues. I have absolutely loved this family relationship that's been developed here. And I love that I care about Buddy. I love that I care about his kids. I love that with the kids, one kid's got powers, the other kid doesn't. And that's going to lead to some jealousy, some feelings of neglect, some feelings of why am I being left out, something that the parents have to deal with. I love that Mom isn't just bright and happy and always with all the stress and everything. She clearly loves her husband. She loves her kids. But, he brings a lot of difficult situations to the table. To say his world is rather quirky would be a gross understatement of the facts, with the rot and everything. What's going on with the daughter is downright creepy. And that would be something that would put stress on everybody, even the mother's mother, the mother-in-law. There's a lot of times where the mother-in-law, at first I was thinking the mother-in-law is really hard on him, but then you can kind of see why he wouldn't be so desirable to have as a son-in-law with everything that's surrounding them. And this has been their world and their life. And, she wants to be protective. So I loved how that all played out. It's something that in this title continues to be interesting to me. Not just the fact that they're doing all these really cool supernatural things and we get to see his amazing powers and his daughter's powers. Its connections with Swamp Thing, which I think is really great with this new crossover. It goes beyond that into just a great example of character development. These titles that I'm rattling off, they have a lot of that in common. They have strong character development. These are characters I really care about. Animal Man's been one of those surprises. I leap to that every month when it comes out. So it's one of those that I want to put on my short list of titles that I really, really have enjoyed.
Yeah, the marriage really tests the in good times and in bad. When you make those vows, when you make that pledge, to be there through thick and thin, you really don't think what exactly she's gone through. That doesn't enter your mind. And the fact that she's still in the game is a statement towards her, much less just, this the whole family. And that's something that I've enjoyed about that title is, as you said, the family dynamic and just how, it's a realism in this supernatural, fantastic world. Because, she's in the game, but, this is this is, difficult to deal with. This isn't just, oh, okay, go on and save the universe, okay. There's real life, real emotional responses in the title.
There's two other things that I want to shout out, and they're not really individual titles, but more themes. Miniseries. I thought some of the miniseries we've been getting this year have been terrific. Just two examples that really just jumped to mind immediately. The Ray, which we shouted out on the show, I just thought was an amazing surprise. Actually, I read the Phantom Lady and Dollman issue that just came out, which was the new mini. And I really like what Gray and Palmiotti are doing with that whole Freedom Fighters world, bringing that back in. The Ray, though, I thought was just it was a character who I mentioned on the show from the first issue. I wanted him in a solo. I still miss that character. I wish I could be reading him monthly right now. I think he's just fun and exciting. And the Shade. For me, the Shade has been so... I think of it as a monthly. It's, it's a 12-issue series, and I've been thinking of that book as a monthly. I'm going to be so sad to not be able to be getting my Shade fix every month because the series is coming to a close. So I've been really enjoying 12 issues of James Robinson back in the Starman world. I don't think you need to have read Starman in order to read The Shade. The Shade is very accessible. I don't find myself going back to my Starman issues or the Shade miniseries from the past and needing to read it. The storyline is its very own contained story. And everything you need to know about the Shade, because you're looking into his past and the past of his family, you really get to know the character in this series. So I thought it was great the way Robinson has crafted this, that it's in such a way where new and old readers get something different out of it. And I think that's a really great way to approach a miniseries like this, because this could be the first Shade opportunity for a great deal of readers. And I just think it's been a great series. I think great art teams, because the art teams have rotated through it depending on the type of issue that you're doing. You've had some special issues like Times Past and stuff like that where you've got new creative teams on the art end working on it. It's a series that I really, really wish was a monthly, because I think this is a character who's just interesting because he's been a villain. I would cautiously say he's been a hero of sorts. And he's also been somewhere in the middle. That's never lost anywhere in this series. And yet he's got this wonderful love life that is something that you get to see in the beginning. And how this guy's protective of this world that he's crafted, his fondness for Opal City. And I don't know, it was a series that really touched me every month. When I'm talking about my top list, I can't not throw that in there, because I think miniseries are just a great opportunity for us to get to know characters and get to see things a lot of times that won't make it in a monthly book. And I really, really enjoyed that miniseries. My last trend would be canceled series. I want to mention them because there was a lot of series that have this year stood out for me as being interesting. Like, for example, OMAC. I don't know what your feelings were on OMAC. I really, issue after issue, as that was going on, grew to really like OMAC. I just thought it was a very different sort of weird, quirky book. I liked the character. It was a concept that I never grew up. When OMAC was originally out, the first OMAC, for whatever reason, it never fit into my budget. I never had an opportunity to read an issue. I did as I got older, but it wasn't something that I ever got into. This series made me go back and get the hardcover, the Kirby hardcover of the OMAC, and I ended up reading that, really enjoyed it. I'm into the whole OMAC concept now because of the currently produced series. I liked it that much that it made me go back and read older material featuring the character. And honestly, I can't recommend the Kirby stuff enough with OMAC. So that for anybody out there like ready to slam their iPod saying, what do you mean you didn't like the Kirby stuff? I don't mean that. I just never was exposed to it. This series was so good that it got me interested. It was quirky and different. I loved the character. I loved his being ripped out of his life, having to become OMAC without it being his choice because Brother Eye forced him to be this character. And I love that there was real consequences to his personal, professional, and social life. This was not something where he went off and was this OMAC and had these adventures. And because sometimes in comics that happens, where the guy's able to go back to his job and there's no consequences because all of these things seem to happen when it's on a lunch break or something. Or, he went for coffee and it just seems to work out that way. I love that he had to deal with the real consequences, not only at work, but with his relationship. I thought it was something that was really well crafted, yet at the same time, there was a fun factor to it, and you felt sorry for the character, too. To the point where I loved seeing him in Justice League International when he came in, but it still made me long more and more for him as a solo character. Captain Atom. This is a title, it's still ongoing right now, but it is going to be wrapping up with a 0 issue. Another example of a cancellation where I'm like, no, I'm liking this title. What do you mean you're canceling this? And that happens. These are interesting concepts that they're trying, and they're stuff that not everybody's going to try. When you throw an OMAC out there, you're taking a risk. When you throw a Captain Atom out there, you're taking a risk. But I thought the creative teams on both of those books did a terrific job of delivering a title that made me take a concept. Captain Atom was not a concept I was ever really interested in. I didn't dislike the character. I loved him when I saw him in team books and crossovers and stuff. But he wasn't a character that I ever was motivated to read on a solo level. This series, I know it was a revamping of Captain Atom, but you give a guy godlike powers, and you really explore how those godlike powers affect his beliefs, affect his sense of right and wrong and morality, What choices do I have the right to make? Can I cure cancer? Can I not? What happens when I start down that path of fixing everything? I can do everything. What will happen to me long term if I believe there is nothing I can't do? I have no limits. I'm omnipotent. That was something that was explored in this series that I really, really enjoyed that the creative team did. Artwork was beautiful. The storyline was great. It's just something different. And I really applaud that with the New 52, because if I'm going to talk about top things, I love that it wasn't, and you notice like I did part of my list was on the larger characters of the DCU, but then the other part of my list really focused on some quirkier concepts that are out there that they're trying. I like both. I don't need every book to be the top-selling hero that DC publishes. I read a lot of comics, as we all do. When I'm reading them, I want the big heavy hitter characters, your Batgirls, your Batmans, things like that. I love those characters, and when you've got these creative teams that are on them right now, yay. But then I also like these experimental titles that they're doing. And that's something that, like, I really thought with the New 52, they've done a great job of doing these different lines in a way where we're getting, and it goes back to a lot of what you were saying earlier, we're getting a really diverse lineup of well-crafted comics. So I'm going to stop there on my list, and then I want to talk about Superman real quick because you made some interesting comments about Superman. But I wanted to give you a second if there's anything you wanted to say, because I know I've been rambling on and on, which I usually do. So go ahead.
Well, it's funny because you talk about just the wide variety of titles. And one of the things that it kind of like clicked in my head, and I've known this for a little while, but there are a lot of titles out there that I am reading and enjoying that I probably wouldn't have picked up if I wasn't doing the podcast. OMAC's one of them. Right there, I know for a fact that if I wasn't doing the podcast, I wouldn't have given it a read. I wouldn't have given it a try because I would say, it's not my cup of tea. It's not my thing. But that was a title that by the end of the run, I was like, man, this is a really cool character, especially where he was at the end of the run. When he jumped over to Justice League International, just that character style that he was there. I was sitting there going, this is a title that, I wish was still around. And I don't know if, because part of the thing is that with the podcast, I was picking up all the titles, and I'm reading all the titles. I'm giving all the titles of at least minimum story arc before I would make any decision to drop them. But it's something that I don't know if I would have actually done that had I just been in my reading, just my normal reading days. But it's because of the show that I'm actually expanding my horizons. I'm trying different titles that are out of my quote-unquote comfort zone, because I am the traditional Big Bang superhero type of Superman, Batman, Green Lantern, dun-da-da, kind of comic reader. But because this show has given me the opportunity to say, okay, let's stretch out. Let's see where else, what interests, what fancies your interest. And talking about like Animal Man and Swamp Man, those are probably two titles
Swamp Thing.
I would.
Swamp Thing.
What did I say?
Swamp Man.
Oh, Swamp Man, Swamp Thing, Swamp Whatnot. How about that? It's all the same.
I'd pay big money to see Swamp Whatnot.
Oh, God.
Jim's going green and everybody's laughing.
Hey, maybe that'll be a costume I'll show up in. I'll show up to a con as Swamp Whatnot. I'll just roll around in the grass, throw grass in my face. There you go. But no, seriously, those are two titles that I probably wouldn't have picked up. Just because I never really hey, let's try it. But with this, I'm reading those things. I'm loving those. I'm just going, this is a really cool environment. This is a really cool universe. And I want to read more of the back stuff. You talked about wanting to go back to read the Kirby OMAC stuff. I'm the same way with a lot of different titles that I wasn't reading before. Sure. With the Hellblazer stuff, with Constantine. This is a character that I'm through Justice League Dark, I'm like, oh, this guy is a ripe little, I like this guy. He's kind of cool. And I want to go back and start picking up some of the Constantine stuff, start reading his back stuff. We talk about Fables. That was a universe that I didn't really get into. I'm picking up the trades. I'm going back. I'm picking up some of those hardcover deluxe editions and getting some really great reading out of that. But it's from the current, reads, the current introductions that's now. And it's, you pick a title that's out of your comfort zone. You give it a story arc. You give it a couple issues. You see what happens. You see where it goes. And I think that's something that's the strength of comics now. I think that's the strength of this universe that we're all a part of, and that's kind of a thing I'm really glad about.
Yeah, when we originally started doing this show, one of the things I was excited about was, first of all, you weren't reading DC books at the time. So it was to see what kind of a lapsed comic reader who never really explored the line, what kind of books you would enjoy. But I was also looking forward to, I had always been the kind of comic fan, I've kind of read a little bit of everything. Marvel, Independence, I'm a comic sponge. I loved going to the comic shop and just grabbing something that I hadn't read before off of the shelf, and I still enjoy doing that. Valiant just did a relaunch of titles. I think it's just great. I'm really loving that whole line as it's coming through, and that's been something for me. I was a longtime Valiant fan with the old run, and that's come back. So this show offered me the same opportunity you mentioned, where there's a lot of characters that I was very familiar with, more from team books than their own solo titles, who I've developed a great fondness for, which is why when I was doing my list, I tried to stick with the top 5, but at the same time, I wanted to shout out some trends that I thought were interesting, and I left out a lot of titles that I think are, top the tier, A+ out of the park titles in there, that I left out because I was trying to stay to a more concise list. But the funny part was, when you were going on with your list, I'm like, no, Jim's feelings really match more with mine. There's so much that I think right now is stunning and stellar that it's one of the reasons why, thematically, when I have discussions with people, and I apologize if I frustrate people with this, but when I talk to people about comics and I see people who are really unhappy with their pull list, I don't get it, because I think that, sure, there's titles like Savage Hawkman. Let's use that as an example. When that series kicked off, I enjoyed it. It wasn't my top of the stack title. I wasn't ready to drop it or anything. I was enjoying the exploration of the character, but I hadn't connected with it the way I had previous Hawkman series. The new creative team came on. They really started to connect more with what I see as core qualities of Hawkman, and that title started to kick up the stack. But here's the thing. I wasn't upset about it because there were so many other fantastic titles in the DC output that my focus was elsewhere. And that's where, being honest, there was a point in time where Savage Hawkman, if I had to cut down on books, it wouldn't have made the cut. Not because it's a bad book, it was a good book, but because there were great books that I wouldn't have canceled when I'm reading. You know what I mean? You got that great book where you're like, if I've got to budget it down, I'm keeping the great book. I'm not going to keep the book that's fallen in the it's good category. So, as a kid growing up, there were a lot of good books that I couldn't read because there were books that, for me, were great. I think everybody's good book is a great book for somebody. That's a title that the storytelling and the creative team, they're connecting with somebody else, and it's their great book. So here's the thing, though. Savage Hawkman has gradually been stepping up to become one of those books that I've been really digging. I'm hoping that that's something after the Zero issue continues as a trend for that title, because I'm digging it. Superman, I want to talk about that series, that line. Action Comics. See, I think Action Comics is an event book. I think everything that's going on in there, and I think that it's been like the looming Death Star for the Superman title, because you've got everything that's going on in that book with this revamping. And I think that's where my focus has been. I wanted to see how he got the suit. I wanted to see why he's running around in jeans and a shirt. What's it like? What's the history with the Kents like? What was the history with Krypton? That book has been an event month in, month out, from the main story to the backup features that are being done in that title. So that book has been where everything's been happening with Superman. I agree with you and him on the Superman title. The main Superman title, I think, has been a good book. I think it's been one of those books that they've been shifting creative teams, not because I think they're bad creative teams. They're good creative teams that have been on there. There's been some great artwork coming in the Superman title, and storytelling's been good. I just think it's been one of those things where they were trying to find a direction for that book. And it seems like they finally... I read the annual. Did you read the annual yet?
No, I haven't had a chance.
Okay. This might help you with the annual. Scott Lobdell wrote the annual. It does a origin of Hellspot, but also brings in much of the DC universe. I don't want to spoil too much, other than the sense that we get into Superman's head, both as Clark Kent and as Superman. We really get to see him in and out of the costume and what his world's like. The action's top-notch. You feel a real sense of a threat. And it was a very satisfying annual that felt to me like an event. It felt like it really established some things. It's what I want out of any title. I don't think you have to be in the middle of a big event for a book to feel like an event. I think your creative team makes, like, why are we throwing Batgirl up there? For me, Batgirl feels like an event. It has its own arcs that are going on in there that feel like an event. Sure, it's crossed over into things like Court of Owls and stuff like that because it just played in that sandbox. But I feel the individual storylines that are going on in Batgirl have felt like events, just using that book as an example. And I think our favorite titles are our favorite titles. Green Lantern, you mentioned that whole line. That line feels like an event. You know, that's every month you feel like every little tidbit you've got to watch on screen because nothing's a throwaway. They're going to come back later and be stuff that is going to lead to a big event in that title. I think your main books, Earth 2 feels like an event. You know, that's a book that throughout every issue has felt like an event, from what led to the death of the Trinity there to the introduction of the individual characters as they're going along and their lives and meeting each other. And it's funny, we don't have a team yet in that book.
No, it's still building.
We're 4 issues in and we don't have a team yet, and yet I still feel like every issue is an event. Superman, I'm sorry, I'll get back to you, I promise. Superman, because this is where I really want to go, is a book that in that annual it started to feel like an event. And that isn't a knock on any creative team member that's worked on the book previously. I think, you know, it's been one of those things when you do this big kind of change with Superman, and a lot of those things are playing out in Action Comics, it's left the main Superman title with creative teams trying to tell modern day stories, I think being unable to reveal secrets about Superman because they need to be revealed in Action Comics, if that makes sense. So I thought the creative teams were delivering a good book when they were stuck to, I think, some parameters. I think now I'm hoping in this next year for Superman, we're going to start seeing a creative team have a shot at least from the annual, really blowing us away with some cool Superman-style stories, big epic battles, big epic enemies, events that bleed over into his personal life, and we get to see how that plays out in the whole thing. So I'm looking forward to that. I have really liked recently, like, the relationship with Lois Lane that we're seeing there, and Lucy Lane, and Jimmy Olsen in the Superman book. So it's been a good book. I like, you know, that Lucy Lane has kind of been calling him out on, like, where have you been? Why aren't you here for these things? You said you were going to pick me up at the airport and you never showed. Another example of where his life as Superman is affecting his personal life. But I felt like in this annual, it added some validity to this being a younger Superman. I'm deliberately dancing around it because I know you haven't read it, so I'm trying to be vague. But I really, really enjoyed the Superman annual. I thought I hope for me it's a sign of what's to come from the current run and the new creative team on that book. Because if that's what we're going to be getting, I'm very, very satisfied with where Superman's going. I think it was cool. One of those that... And I want to shout out, too, when you talk about the Superman family, Supergirl and Superboy. Both titles that I was worried about, I've enjoyed those over the last year. Supergirl in particular, I've actually had to pick one out of the two that was a step above. Supergirl is one of those titles I don't think I mention enough how much I've been digging. Supergirl, I think, has been a standout. I don't know if you agree with me on that. I think Supergirl, out of some of the I guess side characters, you know, which, I mean, it's hard to say with Supergirl with her history. I know how long she's been there and everything, but I'm just saying, you know, she's not Superman. And I think Supergirl, though, has felt like that kind of top tier book. I think they're delivering a story that really differentiates Supergirl. I always go back to me, the Sterling Gates Jamal Igo run is a template for me on what Supergirl should be. And I felt this run is really a strong run of Supergirl. And that was the one I was worried about, really a character I was deeply worried about, and I thought they've done a bang-up job on that book. I don't know, are you in the same place with that book, though?
Yeah, I'm in very solid same place. One of the things, they took a step back in that it's the character's development, the character's time on Earth. But they didn't take a step back in the quality we were getting, the story we were getting. It's not that same Supergirl that I was used to, the Supergirl that I was enjoying, but this character that we have in front of us, she's got that same foundation, that same base, that as she gets used to life on Earth, as she gets adjusted to this strange world she's on, I could see her turning into that Supergirl that I really, really enjoyed, that I really thought was this great hero. It's an awesome story. She's a great hero on her own right now. But that character just had such a growth and I had such a personal connection during the Gates and Igo run that it's hard to, when you're comparing it to what you have as your top, it's hard to say, yeah, this is just as good, because you're comparing to what your stellar, your upper, your top tier of the story. It's kind of like, with Birds of Prey. I always throw it back to, anytime I read Birds of Prey, I compare it back to Gail Simone's run, and it's hard for me to say, yes, this is just as good when I was so in love with the previous stuff. But I see this character, and I see what they've done with Supergirl and where they're going with her, and I'm like, you know what? This is going to be that kind of run. This is going to be that type of story. I will sit back, later and list these two as these great Supergirl runs, saying, hey, here's old school Supergirl, here's the new 52 Supergirl. Both of these things are some fabulous stories, and you should give it a shot, and you should give it a read.
I've stopped doing that. I mean, in the sense where I'll compare runs, because you can't help but do that. But I've stopped letting that influence my reading, because to me, it's really hard to compare the old Birds of Prey to the current one, because they're two very different tones, if that makes sense. This team's kind of, they've been more on the run, in a lot of these issues because of what Dinah Lance thought she did. I think as a team, the reasonings for being put together was a little different. I've really started to enjoy that book on its own merit and stopped comparing it to, because, I mean, to me, the Birds of Prey run that Gail Simone did is one of my favorite runs on a title of all time. So to even compare those is, I think, almost an unfair advantage to the previous run, because it's just got a different take. I think this run of Birds of Prey has been great, though. I think as it's gone along, it's made me appreciate it on its own for what it is versus comparing it to the run that came before.
And I'm getting better at that, but it's a personal weakness that I have, that I do that kind of stuff. And it does hurt sometimes my current reading and my current enjoyment of things. And, it's part of that's part of my change in how I look at things, because I know that it's hurting my current enjoyment. I know that it's just like it's a character trait that I have, that I do go back to, and I try not to. And I know I would enjoy things a lot more if I didn't let the past judge my present, because this is something different. I got to take it for what it is, but it's something I'm working on, and it's something I've actually made very stellar improvements on getting beyond and getting past. And I think Birds is one of those titles. Supergirl has really helped me do that, just because I'm recognizing this great story that I'm getting, and it's helping me push back and push aside the different stuff. But it's a process for me. It's part of who I am. So
I don't think you're wrong on that, Jim. I think and I wasn't trying to in any way imply that because you have that influence, you're wrong and I'm right. It was more of just my own commentary on how I'm viewing things now versus this is how you should be thinking, Jim. I don't mean it that way. I think we're all influenced by what we've read before, who we understand the characters being, and I think that's a normal part of it. That does influence my reading of titles like Birds of Prey. I can't ignore the fact that I've read so much of these. I read Birds of Prey from the beginning, the minis and the one-shots, before it became a solo. I shouldn't say solo, an ongoing series. It was never a solo series, but it was an ongoing series, team book. And when it was just really Barbara and Dinah as like a buddy cop book, where they'd have some guest stars straight on through. And I always loved the concept. I think what's helping me with some of these titles and the revamps is Flashpoint. When Flashpoint happened and we got that shift, it put me in this mindset that everything I've read before happened. But I'm into, I've mentioned on the show, I'm into Back to the Future, Voyagers, Doctor Who, time travel shows where certain events, and by the way, Doctor Who was stellar last night. Last night was the premiere of Doctor Who Season 7. For anyone out there who watched it, oh my gosh. If you've got it on DVR and you haven't seen it, go watch, stop this, pause it, come back to us, watch it, then listen to this. Just because that's how good Doctor Who was.
Hold on a second, then. Let me just go watch it right now,
okay,
and I'll
fine.
come back.
Yeah. I honestly would let you do that, because it was this morning I was going to watch it again, but my wife hadn't seen it again. I hadn't seen it all. I shouldn't say I hadn't seen it again. She hadn't seen it at all last night. I watched it because I couldn't wait. She wanted to see it again, and she said, "You're not going to wait for me?" So I want to watch it again tonight, which I don't do that with very many programs, because I usually, because of doing this and, various other hobbies I have, like gaming and stuff like that, I usually don't rewatch programs this one I couldn't wait to rewatch. A lot like my comics that I like to reread. So time travel shows are very important to me, is really where I'm going with all this. When you've got something like Flashpoint that took the time travel concept and showed us that everything that came before happened, but then this Flashpoint event happened, it started this new divergent timeline where the history of these characters is vastly different. Some of them it's the same because just events played out that way. But some of it's very, very different, and those different events are going to affect even the established characters who do have similar continuities to what they had before. I eat that stuff up. And I think that's really helped me with this to not compare the current Birds of Prey to the previous Birds of Prey. Sure, I shouldn't say that I don't at all, because I mentioned with Aquaman when I was shouting that out before the Peter David run. So yeah, sure, there's that part of me that goes back to that stuff. But I really am far more interested in how their worlds are different because Flashpoint gave me like kind of a stopping point on the previous continuity and gave me a starting point on this continuity. I look at it as a fork in the road. That there was this path that, like, the universe could have gone in. But Flashpoint happened, and now it's set aside a whole new path and a whole new history for these characters. I'm into it. I've really gotten in the 12 issues into it, which when he asked what's been different in the 12 issues, I started off this whole thing being very unsure. We talked about it on the show when we were hearing announcements where there were things that I was really excited about and things, like including the super suit, that I was very worried about, and reboots of Supergirl and Superboy, because there were characters who I really liked, I was really worried about. Jamal Igle and Sterling Gates took a character who was unlikable in Supergirl. I wanted, it was like, oh my gosh, she's getting downright depressing. Made her into a character who was bright and vibrant and interesting and great to read. And it was Supergirl's path that she had gone on prior to their run. It wasn't bad writing. I don't mean it that way. It's just she had gone to such a negative place in her life. It made her this exciting character again. And I didn't want her to go back to being this depressing character because she'd been there. She'd worked past that. And we'd seen her go from A to B on that. I was really afraid we're going to go back to this unlikable Supergirl again. Instead, we've gotten this Supergirl who doesn't feel like she fits in our world, but she's very likable, very interesting. And she's got her own little storyline, her own little place. I love what's been going on with characters who were previously like Silver Banshee, solid villains, to them being people that you're like, woo, are they friends now? And is that going to change them in the future? I just loved how they've just thrown really just interesting curveballs. I don't know. I think this launch for me, 12 issues in, has been really great. There's a lot more that I'm liking and loving than stuff that I'm like, it's just good. I don't have anything that's bad, though. Do you have a book that, and I mean, there's no wrong answer here, Jim. If you've got one, please throw it out there. There's nothing in my reading library right now that I'm saying is bad. If there was, I would honestly shout it out on the show and just say, wow, this is really a bad book. There's books that I think are good, where, like you said, they might get stockpiled. I'm glad I'm reading them. And sometimes the stockpiled ones, they read better when I read 2 or 3 issues together. But I'm not jumping to them because it's just a good book. It's not, hitting me when I've got books that like I can't wait to rip open my comic box when it comes and start reading. They're the ones when I start shuffling around. I read my favorite titles first. I can't wait on those. There's listeners who've said, and there's nothing wrong with this. I admire that they're able to do this. They do their stack in reverse. They start with their least favorite and work to their most favorite out of the stack. And the discipline to do that, my hat's off to you. Because they like to end with the strongest. And that sounds super cool to me. I just can't do it. I'm like, I waited long enough for my box to get here that like I'm ripping it open and reading like the book. Like Justice League 12 was my first read this week, for example. Which was, whoa, super cool. I don't know if you read that yet, but Justice League 12 is, I know you've got family in from out of town. I should mention that. I'm asking you a lot of these titles because I know you've got family in, so I don't know how much comic reading you've actually had time for. But Justice League 12, for anybody out there, was another. That and the Superman Annual were 2 of my first reads this week, and both of them were really, really good.
Yeah, both of those I haven't had a chance to read because, when I just recently moved a couple months ago, and with the moving, I get my comics even a day later than what I used to get them. So now I'm getting them maybe on a Friday night if I'm lucky. So it's weird. My reading, I'm like, dang it, come on, get here. And it's part of it's the mail. It's where I'm in, where my house is. So I haven't had a chance to read anything from this week at all. So, yeah, but to answer, though, your other question, no, I don't have anything that I would say is bad. Everything I'm reading, everything I've gotten, I'm reading, I'm enjoying. There's some stuff that there is the stockpiling that happens. For me, a lot of times, it's not stockpile based on excitement or good or bad. It's stockpile based on what's currently going on in the story. Are there stuff like I said before with the DC Presents? A lot of those get stockpiled because they're not part of the overall overarching main story arc. When the Night of Owls, Court of Owls, all the owl stuff was going on, all of those titles jumped to the top of the stack just because that was going on. With the Green Lantern, with the Jon Stewart stuff, with his trial and everything going on there, those books were getting jumped to the top of the stack. So that's how I do more of my stacking. And now, if I have to choose between my favorite title and my least favorite title, I always go to my favorite first. Because I usually get, the books will come Friday, so I'll come home from work. I'll maybe have an hour or so of reading that I have time, so I got to jump on the initial stuff. Or I'll look at some of the pack stuff, say, okay, what do I have stockpiled? Ooh, I got way too many issues of these, so let me grab this whole stack. I'll sit here and I'll do a mega read right now, get read all these titles, and it's a prioritizing. It's kind of, I think I need to create a little chart, what's read, what's not read. I'm using my second bedroom now as it's my guest bedroom, and I'm using it as my storage, my sorting table. I have all the titles laid out, what hasn't been read, what has been read, what is, I only have a couple of the issues read here. I still got a couple more there. It's, kind of a massive spread out over this over the bed in there. So if I ever have guests over, they're sleeping on the floor because I don't want to move my comics.
Do you have a favorite single issue of a title from this year? Let me set this up a little bit. At GL875 on Twitter. That's at GL875 on Twitter. Twitter for me I've been on Twitter for a long time. I'm using it more and more. I'm not the best Twitter person, but I'm getting better with it. Just because I've used Facebook more often, I'm really starting to enjoy some of the interactions that I'm getting on Twitter as well as on Facebook and things, though, too. And I think as more people have started to follow, our show Twitter account, I'm participating more. But he put that question out there saying, hey, what is your favorite issue of the year? Do you have one? Does it stand out that way? I know I'm asking you this blind, so you haven't had a chance, but is there one that, comes to mind right now as an issue where you're like, wow, this is something that just immediately comes to mind, even if you don't know the issue number, an issue that jumps to your head as being one that you find interesting? Well,
there have been a couple issues out there that I've talked to family, I've talked to friends, I've talked to people at work about. Just, and there are a couple issues that I've brought up a couple times. So I'm going to throw those out there as what I would say are favorites, just because they've been in my head. And the one is Aquaman, where he's at the restaurant. When he's at the seafood restaurant, that's that whole exchange. And I always thought that was a great, just dialogue, just the people going, he's at a seafood restaurant. Oh, my God, we're so sorry. We're eating fish. He's like, yeah, so I came here to eat a fish sandwich, but you talk to fish. No, I don't. Yeah, you do. It was that banter back and forth and just,
That was Aquaman 1, right? Yeah, that all happened in.
Yeah, and Aquaman. That was... that I think is something that is an issue that I would say is one of my favorites from this year. I think let's see here. There's been a couple of the Batgirl stuff I've talked about.
Jim, one issue.
I can't do one issue.
Well, see, that was the question. I said, do you have a favorite single issue of the year? You're going into 5 of them. The whole point of his Twitter rant was, no, hold on, stop. You've got to stop.
Single.
No, you've got to stop, though. But the whole point of his Twitter poll was, do you have one single issue that was your favorite of the last 12 months? So you can't. It's not one of those where you can list 5.
Give me a second. Give me a second. Let me see here. You know what? I'll just stick with my Aquaman. I'll just stick with that issue and say that is it, because even though there was a couple other issues, there are a couple other standout ones, but I think I've probably talked about that issue the most out of all the other ones. I've talked about a couple of the Batgirl stuff. I've talked about some of the Batwoman stuff, but that Aquaman one I know I've brought up a couple times to different, and I'm bringing it up to people outside of the comic book universe, people who aren't geeks, who aren't fans, who make the silly, unfortunate comments of, hey, what's going on in the comic book world? Well, since you ask, let me bother you for 20, 30 minutes. And I think that Aquaman issue has been one that I've talked about to a lot of people on. So I'm going to say that right there.
For me, it was that Batman issue 8 where he first started fighting in the Batcave, and we saw him come out for the first time in that bat armor. Because it led to that whole debate with him and Alfred, where he was, it was the prelude to him finally locking in Alfred and saying, no, you've got to, fight by yourself. But I love this whole, get the hell out of my house. We'd seen the Talons doing the beatdown on Bruce for all the issues leading up to this. And in issue 8 was the first time we saw this moment where it's like, okay, enough is enough. Now we're going to throw down. I needed that moment. I thought this whole Court of Owls thing was fantastic. But for me to have a Batman moment where you see Bruce come out and you're like, oh, I want to see him go to town. It reminded me of what I liked in Dark Knight Returns when he came out in that suit of armor and fought Superman. We see him come out now and he's like, okay, this is overwhelming odds. These creatures that can't die. This is one of those times where I've got to bat up with this suit of armor. And it was just great. I really, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed some of the background story in that as well because it had a backup in there. I don't know, just everything about that I really enjoyed because we saw the murders start to be laid out as well. That was an issue that really stood out for me from the Court of Owls. If I had to pick my favorite issue of the year, it would be Batman #8, best single issue. And and I want to clarify something. I know I was cutting you off there. I'm 100% I could keep going and go with some, I'd go to Batgirl, I'd go to Batman and Robin, I'd start going to every title that I read, and I could probably pick a favorite issue of that book. But for me, when I've got a Batman title and he's my favorite character and it's delivered this way, that issue stood out for me in particular. So that's what it was. And I was going to force us because it's either we could come up with one or we couldn't. It was a good question that he threw up on Twitter, so I wanted to give him what he asked for, which was pick one, which we're not good at.
Yeah. Well, pick 3 for me is equal to pick 1.
Yeah, but it wasn't for his Twitter poll. You had to pick one, so I thought that was kind of cool. But that's at GL875 for anybody out there that wants to participate, and just let him know what your favorites are. I thought that was cool. That was a cool little Twitter thing that he threw out there. I want to give a quick shout out to X from the Altered Egos podcast, and I also want to talk about Daryl Taylor from the Taylor Network. And I want to give a quick shout out to them. And they're doing this really cool weight loss challenge between now and the New York Comic Con to see who loses the biggest percentage of body weight. And the whole point of this is to, first of all, for them to lose weight, but also to donate money to the wonderful organization, the Hero Initiative. If you've never checked out the Hero Initiative, it's heroinitiative.org. It's a wonderful organization that's really helping out creators from the past who have influenced the wonderful comics we're reading today, who are in financial hardship for a variety of different reasons. Things have changed greatly in the comic book marketplace, and honestly for comic book creators, since the original creators laid down this wonderful groundwork for us. And this is a great chance for those of us who are really enjoying this hobby to donate to a cause that really hits home for us. HeroInitiative.org really explains the Hero Initiative program a lot better than I do. Please go there and check it out. I also put links to the Razoo page. It's called Becoming Less of a Man for Your Heroes. I think it's a really, really cool idea, so I just wanted to shout this out once again. I donate to the Hero Initiative every year. I'm going to donate to this cause because I think it's a great idea as well. So please consider donating yourself. And check this out, and the Razoo page is linked right in our show notes. I just think it's a great cause, so thank you for everyone who takes a chance and checks this out. It's a good cause to help out, a good charitable cause to help out leading into New York Comic Con. And if you're going, it's a great chance to stop by and see these guys and high-five them for their commitment to this, because I think it's a really cool idea.
Could you just once say, let's get in the car? Is that so hard?
Once again, sponsoring us this episode are DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. Remember, over at DCBService.com this month, 50% off all new DC trades and hardcovers. Remember to link your digital accounts to DCBService.com. Get that 5% credit from every purchase that you make. It doesn't cost you anything more to do it. You get credit towards making purchases over at DCBService.com. It's just basically you're giving yourself free cash for things you're already buying. Over at InStockTrades.com, remember, they're once again doing doing that 65% off a massive inventory that they have of trades and hardcovers. Then they are also doing 45% off any hardcover and trade that falls outside of that category. So it's an amazing opportunity to get an amazing deal from InStockTrades.com. Orders of $50 or more give you free shipping. I want to thank once again DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com for supporting our show. I want to shout out our show voicemail line. Actually, you saw that a big segment of this episode, and this happens sometimes, where there's sometimes a voicemail will trigger something in us where we just go off on a tangent and really have a discussion that we didn't expect to have. And that was the case in this episode. So please, if you want to participate in the show voicemail line, it's 1-440-388-4434. Or Dr. Norge on Skype. That's always in our show notes. It's always up on our website. We love having you part of the show. I do air every voicemail. So if you want your thoughts on our episodes, if you have things you want to ask us, you want things you want us to talk about, throw them right up on the voicemail line, and we will definitely get them a part of the podcast. We love having you part of the show. Want to shout out RagingBullets.com. Every week I update RagingBullets.com with show news, the episodes that have been posted, things like that. We're also linked to Twitter, Facebook, Google+. We have a wonderful Facebook group, which is separate from our regular Facebook page. And if you want to join that Facebook group, we would love to have you part of the discussion. We have a lively discussion group with great ideas that people will throw out. I'm always amazed at the topics that are up there. And people are just keeping up with everything going on, not just in DC, but across comics. And I do want to do shout out to our various social media sites. Please, if you have anything from Kickstarter campaigns straight on through to your own comics, your own websites, your own blogs, podcasts, whatever, and you think they're relevant to our listening audience, whether it's DC or not, please make sure to post that stuff. I look at anything we do here as cross-promotion. The idea is we're all comic fans and we're all part of the fandom community. So, one hand washes the other. You guys are always great about supporting us. We want to support you as well. So please feel free to post anything. There's no limitations on that. We always want to do cross promotion on those sites, and I think that's just really, really cool. Speaking of Kickstarters, I wanted to shout out congratulations to Jamal Eigel for Molly Danger. The Kickstarter campaign passed, which means all of us who participated get a chance now to read Molly Danger, and that's really, really cool. I'm excited for Jamal Eigel for that. Also, Leaving Megalopolis from Jim Calafiore and Gail Simone has already passed the mark. It's really cool that that book is going to definitely be published as well. I love following these Kickstarter campaigns even after they've reached their goal, and I encourage you to do that with any Kickstarters that you're following. Check and see, because they hit certain cutoff points beyond just getting it funded, where if they go to a certain distance, they have other things that they're adding to the community of people that supported it. Sometimes it'll be additional page counts, sometimes it'll be additional swag, sometimes it'll be a cover choice. There's all kinds of cool things that creators are doing to get you involved in those Kickstarter campaigns. So Kickstarter is wonderful, and if anybody's out there ever doing a Kickstarter and you want us to promote it on the show, or you want to promote it on our websites or things like that, please let me know. I'm, again, like I said earlier, all about cross promotion, and I love getting that word out there. But I'm really thrilled for those two in particular, because those are friends of the show, and I'm really glad to see, and from a selfish standpoint, I want to read both of those projects, so I'm excited that they're going to be made now. So thank you for everybody out there who is part of our listening audience that supported those projects, because we all win, because anybody who participated gets to enjoy those projects, and that's the great thing about Kickstarter. It's something everybody who participated was a part of. So thank you very much for doing that. Like I said, from a very selfish standpoint, because I want to read those projects. Our next episode, we're going to wrap up our look right for now at Before Watchmen. We're also going to have some, depending on the time we have left, some casual DC chat. This will be our last episode before we kick into our look at the Zero issues. And really, it's basically going to be a multi-month look at every title from DC. We're going to go through all the titles, the state of the titles, how are we enjoying them 1 year later, how do we feel about the directions that they're going in with the Zero issue, did we like the origins, did we like some of the directions those went in. So we're going to go through every single DC title once again like we did last year at this time. So hopefully for those of you that enjoyed that, you're excited that we're going to be going through that process again. One more episode until then, because that'll actually fit the time that Jim and I get our books. We'll have a chance to read them, prepare for that episode, and then we'll kick off a multi-episode look at the DC Universe once again. So we will see everyone next week.
Bye!
Flying through space and time, 1,000 different lifetimes. Faded for love and flaws and incredibly clear sightlines. swinging your mace around. Such a practical outlook, helping the JSA and occasionally supporting your own book. Hawkman, Hawkman, eagle eyes can't see. Hawkman, your plan and what you do to me. Hawkman. The villains are closing in, be they Thanin Guard or Egyptian, working so hard to thwart you and Hawkgirl's mission. The odds are not on your side, and danger seems to stack up. Things would be so much easier if you